With that,
I appreciate all of Creighton's efforts as well. Again, I know many of you, you've been in this room before for some other presentations that we've been able to bring in, and Creighton has been a fantastic partner with us. It does help that, Tim has walked in most of our shoes. He's been a principal. He's wore a lot of those hats in Catholic education, and just a good guy to sit down with over a cup of coffee and
and a beer.
Or two. And have some good, honest conversations about Catholic education. But I do appreciate everything he has done here at Creighton. Again, in a lot of ways, the education department and the outreach, it always comes back to Tim. So they've been very supportive. I do also want to thank, before we get going here, Katie and Donna have done all the work on this in terms of coordinating details, and I appreciate everything they have done to make this a reality here today. They've put in a lot of work on that. Most of you have heard me talk many times over about blended learning and just kind of the bigger vision for Catholic education, so I won't drown you with some of that same conversation again, but just wanted to talk a little bit in terms of how we came to have these guests here today before I do give that formal introduction. Father McGuire spoke, I think it was last summer. NCEA had asked him to give a very similar presentation or something along these lines to anybody throughout the country that was interested in learning more. And we had 10 administrators, both from the metro and the rural, hop on a plane, go out to San Jose last year, and I had just fantastic feedback coming back from those administrators saying, you've got to get Father McGuire here to Omaha. Just really creates an exciting vision for education and how thinking outside the box is going to be valuable to our strengthening our schools here in Catholic education. And I had read up a bit on him as well, so we're excited to have him here this morning. Our afternoon guests, Kendra and Andrea, who we'll introduce later, I found out about what was going on in Grand Rapids very early on. When I was first appointed superintendent, I went to the superintendent's conference in Columbus, Ohio. That's where I met their superintendent, Dave Faber, who was talking about their WINGS model that they had brought into, I think it was 3 rural schools at the time. And it was just a fascinating model in my mind, just hearing what they were able to do in 3 small rural schools that were having some challenges. I'm sure they'll touch upon that. You guys are now in year 5, is it?
Beginning of year 5, yeah.
Beginning of year 5 of this model. And it's a model, many of you had seen a video when I first started talking about blended learning. I was showing you a model of Mission Dolores, an inner city school in San Francisco. And so many of you have seen that YouTube video. And I think there's a lot of overlap between what you'll hear from the Grand Rapids model to that Mission Dolores school. So the whole blended learning is also this morning about governance as well. We talked about the metro. It was brought up just in terms of different governance models. We do have our consortium schools. So you're going to hear some conversation as well on governance. At the end of the day, a lot of this is really just to continue our push to not accept the status quo. I think that has been one of the drawbacks of Catholic education on the whole nationally. It's nobody's fault. We all live on our little islands. We're all very decentralized, and we all wear so many hats that it's sometimes hard to think outside that box. But a lot of the success we have had locally, it's not because we've embraced the status quo. It's because we are challenging certain systems or certain ideas, and we're pushing forward in a lot of those areas. And I think that's a general theme that you picked up from as well this morning. So I am going to apologize at this point because I don't want to miss anything, but I am going to read Father Brendan McGuire's little bio on him so we know who is up here talking in front of us. But I do want to welcome Father Brendan McGuire, who is the Vicar General of the Diocese of San Jose, California. In this role, he is responsible for special projects, and in particular, the implementation of the Diocesan Pastoral Plan, which has recently been expanded to include Catholic school education. Father Brendan also serves as pastor of Holy Spirit Parish in San Jose. Before being ordained a priest in 2000, Father Brendan was executive director of PCMCIA, the PC Card Trade Association that promoted the International Computer Standard for laptop computers. He has a master's degree in theology from St. Patrick's Seminary and University in Menlo Park, California. He has an undergraduate degree in electronic engineering and master's degree in computer science from Trinity College, Dublin. In 2012, he completed the Stanford Executive Program, an intensive business leadership program for executives of large organizations. He is a native of Ireland and the youngest of 12 children. Father Brendan co-leads a team in the Diocese of San Jose to transform Catholic elementary school education. With a combined approach of new school governance, blended learning, and collaborative learning models, this team is revitalizing the first 7 of 28 schools in a new system of Catholic education. The St. Catherine Drexel School Initiative is the Diocese of San Jose's response to the need to recommit to and bolster the levels of student academic success and to harness technology to improve student learning. And I'm going to interject real quick. There is a lot of attention being focused on this Drexel model nationally. I've heard the USCCB talking about the Drexel model, NCEA talking about the Drexel model, so a lot of attention nationally. To make our schools more effective, efficient, and sustainable. It builds on what we do well educationally and helps us to use the power of available technology in ways that increase student engagement, academic learning, and higher level thinking skills. The initiative will meet the challenges of maintaining a vigorous Catholic identity, improve academic performance, and position us for a financially secure future. Please help me welcome Father Brendan McGuire.
Thank you, Patrick. I always get nervous when I hear that given out because I'm going like, who's he talking about? Let me I always like to, you know who I am now because you've heard that. I'd like to kind of know a little bit about who you guys are. How many of you have been in Catholic education 5 years or more? 10 years or more? 15 years or more? 20 years or more? 25? 30? 40? 50? Sister, you stand alone and father and sisters. So I do this at all the presentations I give, and that's exactly what happens. We have, 5, 10, 20. When you get up to the 40 and 50, we're down to just the religious level, because in fact, our school system was built on the religious. I mean, that's how it came about. And that's what I want to do. I want to do a quick survey. I know you've probably heard some of this stuff before. And I'm going to try and do it a little bit sorry, and then leave some room for dialogue in the middle of it. And then we'll go back to some of the data and then a little more dialogue. And in the end, I know we're going to have tons of time, I think, at the end of the day, for questions after we've had some more sessions. So let me just start. How many of you are principals? Okay, so, and how many of you are pastors? I mean, there's pastors here, there's a handful of pastors, I say 4 or 5 pastors, okay. So that helps me. So let me give you a quick survey. And you've probably heard this before, but let me do it relatively fast. So, I mean, when the Catholic school, now, first of all, one of the things that there's a misnomer, when we say we call it Catholic school system, there is no system in the system. Okay, I mean, I think it needs to be stated, because when we think, like, so I come from the business world, right? And I'm going to constantly go back and forth, right? The problem, when we think systems, we talk about systemic capabilities and systemic capacities and systemic benefits. We have systemic, the only system we have is system baggage. And what I mean by that is we have all the overhead of being a system with zero of the benefit of being a system. And what I mean by that is that there are certain things you gain when you go into a system. You got a certain amount of centralized sources that allow you to do things that are efficient, and then you decentralize certain things to allow it to work autonomously as necessary. So the question is, how did the system, what was the system? To understand, before you start changing something, we have to understand it. Okay, so we went back and I did all this research about 5 or 6 years ago when it was clear to us at the Diocese of San Jose that we were not going to be spared the trajectory that Catholic education in the country was happening. We had really up to about 7 years ago, it never really affected us. Our numbers were strong. We were losing practically zero. We gained 1 or 2 or 3% and lose it 1%. It really didn't affect. 7 years ago, it hit us. And that was around the time when we had the economic collapse. And it hit us bad. And we immediately saw a dip, and it's dipped ever since until we started Drexel. So how do we go back to the very beginning? How did we get about, when the Catholic Church decided that Catholic schools needed to come about, the bishops and the pastors came together and they said, this is really, really important. And they said that the only way our Catholic children are going to get a good quality education is that we engage in it. And they partnered with the sisters. They asked numerous religious communities from all over the world to come and to help on this project. This was not a small project. This was a major initiative inside the Catholic Church. And so religious orders often followed those immigrant communities, whether they were Irish, whether they were German or Italian or French. The sisters came with them, sometimes forging, literally walking into a diocese having nothing. Not even a building. Say, sisters, thank you for doing it. They kind of thought, well, where do we do it? And they would have to go find a church building. They would work with a pastor. The pastor would help them build a building. And they formed incredible partnerships with the local pastors. But it was all about, it was huge support for it. Like, I mean, they were committed to it. The religious orders, as you well know, were the founding. One of the things that's important to understand about this, when the sisters came in, the sisters here will lay claim to this better than I will, they often were asked not to just one school, but multiple schools in a diocese. Now, in there is the secret sauce. And it's not obvious at first. But let's say Sister Mary Patrick's the superior. She takes on 3 schools and runs 3 schools. She has the staff to do those. Now think of what happens every night. All those sisters come back to the house. Whether you can avoid it or not, they will share best practices. Over dinner, over conversation, or young Sister Joseph, or Sister, I had a teacher who was Sister Mary Joseph. Sister Mary Joseph was a young teacher when she joined us. Right? She went, as soon as she went home, she would talk to the senior sister who'd been there for 10, 15 years. Anytime you had a problem, they would go to them. And they would learn from each other in a very organic way. That's the secret sauce. But the sisters were really, really good at this. They had manuals how to open a school. They had manuals how to expand schools, number of schools. They had manuals how to close a school. They had it all documented. And unfortunately, a lot of that documentation was not captured and not passed on, but most of it was. And the religious leaders handed it on most often to a principal that was the last religious standing in that parish, in the school. And along the line, it was handed on to lay people. And the lay principals who took that on first, some of you are here, did a phenomenal job trying to hold on to the charism of that religious community. It's some amazing ways in which it's been held on to. But after a second principle, a third principle, that's got diluted down. Now, it's not just the staff that got changed. The community also stopped its support. So there was a huge communal, what I would call cultural and parochial support for it. The parish and father wanted it. The community wanted it. They supported it. They paid for some of this. They took care of the buildings. Then when there was a rally, if there was a building needed, everybody got around. There was a complete ecosystem around the parish schools. And as a result, and I'm just going to give you some numbers, back in 1962 when I did these numbers, there was 4.3 million students in elementary school. There was another 1.5 million, or I think nearly 7 in high school. I'm just doing elementary because that's I want to say this is my area of interest is elementary schools, because all our high schools in Diocese of San Jose are doing very, very well. So it didn't need my attention, or the bishop didn't need me to give it attention. How many do you think are many in schools? Nationwide, that was 4.3 in 1962. How many do you think there are today? Just give me a guess. How much do you think we've lost in 50 years? I mean, clearly we've lost, otherwise I wouldn't be here, right? We can figure that out. So how many do you think we lost? 60%? 50%? So here's the shocking number. It's only 1.2. Something over 70%. So, I mean, you look at the numbers and you say, it was representing 13.2% of the population of elementary schools. Today, it's just now approaching, I think this year, last year was the first year we were less than charter schools nationwide. Charter schools have outgrown us now. And you say, how could we possibly have not allowed that to happen? And I'll tell you why. And you can point the fingers at the pastors, you can point the finger at the principals, you can point the finger at the bishops, or you can point the finger at all of them, or you can simply say, it wasn't a system. You couldn't save the system because there was no system to save. Each individual school closed. There's no way to stop it. Because there was no, oh, what about us? It's coming our way. That affected them. That was their problem. Keep your head down. Keep going. We got to get more. We got to get more. We'll get those students. And so they take the students, the leftover students from that poor school, and we didn't know enough about schools. So what happened was, there are some contributing factors, and these are well documented by CARA, NCEA. There's more. I'm just going to highlight some of them here. Increasing costs is a significant one, and I will say that that's typically the reason why a family leave. But I will tell you, you have to bore down into details. Not really why they leave. It's money, but I'll tell you what the money says. The money says it's not, I can't afford it. But what they're really saying to you, scratching, you have to ask, this is good sociological data, you got to go down one level and ask why. It's because the value for money is not there. It's what they're getting in return for the money. It's not that they'll make sacrifices just like every generation will do. They'll make sacrifices for Catholic education, but not at the cost of academic achievement. Not at the cost of academic achievement. And not at the cost of the other things that they have today. Our society is more secularized today than certainly in the last 100 years. Now, it's, again, nowhere near some secularized centuries ago. Like, we think that this is the most secular century we live in. No, it's not. Not even close. Go back and look at European history, and you see how they had religious, but it was tied to the state. It was for economic gain. It wasn't true cultural support. But the scores, and I want to say this cautiously, the scores nationally, the problem, and I'm sure it's the same here, you can't really compare against public school data because it's not exactly the same testing. Like, I don't know, we test at the beginning of the school year, the public schools test at the end of the school years, and really what we ought to be doing is testing both at the beginning and at the end and in the middle to try and find out how are we helping our students. And that's kind of the best practices today. But as public schools now are switching over to some of the more common, the Common Core standards, we are able to compare data. And shockingly, we're not superbly better than them. We're just as good as them. We're not worse, but we're not super. We're not like it used to be years ago when sisters ran the school. There was a marked difference, and that was a lot to do, not because of the pathological difference. And there was a way to support that discipline with good academic rigor. And I think so much has changed in today's world that it's hard to sometimes keep up. Anyway, my point is that we have definitely had a decline in Catholic identity. As much as, and some of this is perceived versus real, but when you don't see a priest on campus, when you don't see a nun on campus, then there's a perception we don't have as much religious education. And I think all the lay people who are teachers in my school, in my district, are wonderful Catholics, and they do a really great job and pass on the faith as best they can. Is that the same as a priest and a religious? In the minds of the parents, probably not. But so therefore, we have to be much more explicit about what that means. We have to define it more. And what are the desired outcomes? How often do they come to Mass? How often do they receive the sacraments of reconciliation? How often do they come? When do they receive the other sacraments? And we have to name and be explicit about what it is we're going to try and do in the classroom with regards to Catholic education. So you have to name it. So this I mentioned earlier. Now we just don't have the sisters with those networks. So we have independently operating schools. So today we have our Catholic school system largely is, you've got networks that have been formed, but largely it is a confederation of independently operated schools run by a pastor who has typically got no formal education in educational practices, and they are formally the leader of that school. They hire a principal, and thank God the principals are as well trained as they are, because they're really running the school. The pastor has so many things he has to do. It isn't humanly possible. It is not humanly possible to do all the things and take care of the busy unit called the school. And yet canon law is not keeping up with that change. So one of the things I'm going to be proposing is some of those changes. So one of the things I talked about, the benefit of a system and the lack of a benefit of a system. So we have no operational efficiency when you don't have a network. What I mean by that is if you're running, just take something as simple as technology, right? It's one of the hardest things to keep up with technology. Even in the business world, it's hard to keep up with technology. Things are changing so much. I mean, look at the iPhones. The iPhone comes out every 6 months with a new one, features. And that's a consumer device. If you look at some of the business devices, they're coming out every 6 months. They're obsolete, completely obsolete in 2 years. I mean, years ago, that used to be 5. Before that, it was 10. When I got into college, it was 10 years obsolescence. Now it's considered 2 years. And if you aren't redoing your products every 6 months, you are leaving something on the table. I'll speak a little more about this in a second. But there is less cultural support because of the more secularized society we live in. We largely we've lived in a very parochial, years ago we lived in a parochial, everyone lived around the same community, went to the same church where their children went to, they played in neighborhoods with the kids. I don't know about you, but my neighborhood, not anything like that anymore. I mean, they go to church wherever they want. That might be across town, that might be next town over. The attendance at church has just, dropped off. And again, that's symptomatic, not the actual cause. We always tend to look at people aren't coming to church. That's the problem. I would disagree. I think that's the symptom. They're not coming to church. Why? A largely secularized society and a lot of other complex reasons, which we're not going to go into today. But let me give you a little different view of this. So in the business world, there's a chart that they use to understand the growth model. So you've got a product life cycle, right? Every product has a life cycle. You reach its apex, the point of which you got the most units being sold. Let's say it's a vacuum cleaner, right? The very first vacuum cleaner that came out, it reached an incredible point of where they were selling so many of them. It was just brilliant product. And then it starts to taper off and goes down. Eventually, that product will go obsolete, no longer be manufactured because you can't afford to manufacture. That's the product life cycle. The top of that curve is called the inflection point. And around that curve, around that inflection point, is what's known as the strategic operational zone. Strategic operational zone, which is basically this area around here, is on your way up to the top, and on the back end of the curve, you're in a high strategy zone. It's a zone in which there's a clear mandate for change. And you are in that zone, you make change. And you know what's known as you jump the S curve. You innovate, you do something to move off that curve, and you get onto another curve. Because if you don't, you know what's going to happen. You're going to go out of business. Right, that's the way business models are. This is not mine. This is Stanford's or every other business college and university has this curve. Right? And what happens is if in this zone you do not do strategic, if you do not do strategy, and you continue, then you will go out of business. Your product will go out of business. You will stop. It will stop. It doesn't make any difference what product you're making. It will go out of business because eventually it reaches. Now, I think there are certain things that transcends this. Like, I think if you're a maker of Bibles, for example, I think you'll continue to have a market, right? So I get there are certain things, but in things that you have to pay for significantly, you're not going to. So an example, the iPhone. The iPhone comes along, it has a significant growth, massive growth. It reaches a point at which it's not going to get past, and what does it do? iPhone 2. Jumps the S curve. and goes on, and then they do the S-curve more, and they innovate more, and they add more value, and then they keep on doing it until the point at which they have, continued growth. Now, I do this for spirituality. I've used this curve for spiritual growth, and I'm not going to do that to you. I'm just going to, the illustration is where's Catholic schools? And what are we going to do to jump the S-curve? And I'm suggesting that if we don't do anything, which is what Patrick just said and Tim just said before that, if we don't do anything, we know where we're going to go. And tons of schools have gone there already. Thousands, not tens, thousands of schools have been closed around the country. Now, some are unstoppable. I get that. You got an urban school, it's decimated downtown Detroit, there's no more children, no more neighborhood. You can't keep a school open, you can't even keep a church open, there's no more people. I get that. But that's not what's happening anymore. This last 2 decades, we've been closing schools that could have, and quite frankly should have, gone through an innovation cycle, had gone through a strategic, and I will say this, we're live, so I have to be careful of the words. We ought to take real serious stock of how we missed that. Because we missed, and children have been affected because of that, because we were asleep at the wheel. Just understand that we are responsible for children not having access to quality education because we were not taking note of it. Now, whether that be bishops, priests, pastors, principals, administrators, whatever it is, we have to be honest with ourselves and say, okay, mistake made, no more. Now we stop it, now we change it. No more children are going to be losing the opportunity to have education. And we need to stop it now. It's a wake-up call. And we really need to stop this. We've induced ourselves into a sort of a dull slumber of denial that there's a problem. There's nowhere in the country could deny the fact that Catholic education has been a tremendous social change for the positive over years. And the absence of them has been a degradation of societal impact. And we're not just talking about our Catholic children. We're talking about entire neighborhoods changing. And there's been reports written on this. I'm sure you've read them. Cara has done a great report talking about the actual social impact of a school. And when Catholic school closes and replaced by a charter school, that social impact does not get replaced. The social impact, what we bring to the society, is a value added. Okay, we can all believe that, but the reality is we're still getting hurt. So what are we going to do? We have to look at, again, examine the data, be honest with it, take some personal reflection, and then say, what do we do? So what we did this in San Jose. At the time we did this, and I'm going to ask the question, where are you at the Diocese of Omaha? At the time we did this 4 years ago, charter schools, there are 32 charter schools that come in, and they have 17,000, surpassing our own number of schools in just 10 years. 10 years they surpassed us. Now the first school was open 20 years, but pretty much no one got any more charters until about another 7 years. But in basically, if you want to take the totality from the first to the last, 20 years of charter schools, they've outgrown the Catholic schools in 20 years. Unbelievable how we could have missed it. Private schools. So I don't know if you have these challenges here, like you may not have these same challenges. Private schools, we have 50 private schools. We are a wealthy area in San Jose. We have people sending their children to a school 2 blocks away from my school for twice the price of Catholic education. I know that education is not as good, but they have better marketing people than we do. And they sell the cahoots out of it, and parents are convinced that it's better education. They don't share one iota of data. Why? Because they can't, because it's not any good. So they market it really well, which we have got wonderful marketers in San Jose. And so we're completely blitzed by it. 50 schools, and they have this group called Challenger. They have scale, they already have plans to open 10 more in the next 5 years. 10 more schools. Why? Because people in California can afford that extra. So then you say, if they can afford it, why can't ours afford it? Well, again, it's often like smoke and mirrors. So there are private schools and charter schools are both growing. So the question is, what is your internal pressure points? Is it only public schools, free public school, which is a serious, I like to talk in vectors. So we have one vector, which is charter schools, another vector, which is private schools, private, non-religious, they're private non-religious. And then we have public schools. Public schools is our least impacted vector for us. But that might be your biggest vector that impacts you. What do you think it is? Let's just pause for a second. What do you believe is the biggest impact pressuring you as administrators? Now, given that you've turned the tide a little bit on some of your numbers, which is great, but what do you think is still the number one thing that's drawing them away from Catholic schools, or drawing them? What is your biggest competition? Don't be afraid, I won't. What do you think? Do you have charter schools? You don't have any charter schools? Really? One. In all of the dioceses of Omaha?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, you are. Oh man, let me come to Omaha. It doesn't allow charter schools? Well, neither did we up until 15 years ago. But it's okay, so how about private schools? A few? High end? Or just regular charter schools, non-religious? So your only competition is public schools, which is of course free. Needless to remember that, right? So it's a pretty stiff. Now, do you know what their scores are? How do they do?
Well, we've got 7 public schools. That's pretty decent.
You got 7 different public school districts. And so what will be, let's just take the one that impact the urban versus, or your urban Catholic schools versus urban. Let's just talk about one of them, for example. We don't want to break it open, all of it. Are you able to, on the urban, are they able to serve the urban students as well as Catholic schools?
I say the urban is, OPS is probably the least viewed as excellent schools. West Side, Millard, Elkhorn, Benning.
They're all higher performing. Okay, so you mirrored it. You mirrored a national trend. The national trend is the high-end students in public schools are getting taken care of for the most part. Not stunning, but they're decent. On some pockets, it's brilliant because they got a lot of money. They put resources, great administrator. But the lower economically ended public schools are getting slammed. In California, we got the worst results in 25 years this year. They are now even a further drop in serving the public schools serving the lowest. And there's all this outrage. And I want to say, just give us some of the money. We'll do it better. We'll do it way better. But they won't allow choice. Do you have vouchers or tax credits, sir? No, so neither do we. And we probably never will. Our state is so owned by the Democrats. We'll never get it. But that's so you got to look at, so what you've got to do is, you're going to be you've got to find a way to communicate, and I think that's what your office is already doing with regards to the Hispanics in particular. You've got a marketing challenge. If your results are there, then you got to find a way to give the results and then market the results. But I'm going to say you've got to find a way to give you value added. Unless parents see a value added, why should they pay $4,000 for an education when they can get it for free? Why would they bother doing that if they don't see any noticeable difference? And so we've got to bring it to them. They're not convinced, and I don't want to offend the priests of religion, but they're not convinced with the religious argument anymore. They're just not. Years ago, that was there, but that is not here anymore. Now, I lament that, but that's the reality. You've got to be honest with the landscape. That's the landscape. If you're going to try and keep going, harking back, well, we got to set up schools that are truly Catholic. No, they are truly Catholic. That's not the issue. We've got to be honest. The issue is we've got to be able to document how they are better than public schools. And then you got to go out and market yourself. Now, we don't do this very well as Catholics. We don't like to sell up what we do. It's not in our nature. Look at all the good we do. Look at all the people we serve who are hungry. Look at all the children. Okay, I don't necessarily need you, but you've got to tell the story some way. Okay, you're going to be your challenge. But let me talk about our model of how we came up with it. What was it? So, and doing the research of what you've done, you've already done this in multiple schools and actually sections of schools. So you've got some local success here that You don't need somebody from San Jose to come in and tell you the success, but a voice, you know what the definition of expert is? Somebody comes in from 50 miles or more, right? I get that. Like we had somebody else come into our diocese last week, so go figure, right? So, but fundamentally, nobody would disagree with this. Not a pastor, not a principal would disagree with this definition of our vision statement. Community of students, parents, teachers, and staff, or parishioners who are guided by the gifts of the Holy Spirit, forms the whole person through faith, knowledge, and community. Wonderful. But our school does that, you'd say. Okay? All right. So ours, we had to add something to it. We wanted to create a state-of-the-art educational system that allows us to produce Christ-centered, compassionate, confident leaders. Now, the second one is, and we've always known this, but we don't probably say it, not everyone's a leader. I know every parent thinks their child is going to be a leader, but we all know that they can't be all leaders. But we don't necessarily want to create followers, right? Or at least we don't want to create blind followers, right? So we want to call this, so what's the term? We want to call them engaged problem solvers. That you give them the skills to engage in problem solving in a way in which they bring the moral fabric of who they are, the value-based system. So we call it problem solvers who exercise moral judgment or moral courage, and then students who are in service. Now, I think the last one, we do a pretty good job of, but I don't think we don't systematize it. So a lot of these we do, but we don't do it in a good system. We don't use best practice. The question is, okay, so what's different and how do we accomplish it? Let me tell you. Well, we wanted to create a system that transforms Catholic education that is resource rich. In other words, that we spend significant time in bringing about the appropriate resources that enables the teacher to drive instruction for the student. And so we have to develop that at a district level, if you will. We believe that the way to do that was through blended learning. Now I'm going to explain my understanding of blended learning. There's lots of definitions out there, and there's lots of different understandings now. I'm going to spend some time breaking that definition open in a second. But the key component to our model is engaging the student at their learning level, at their learning modality, and engaging them in that, and then sustaining it through a robust use of technology. It is not about technology. Okay, I'm going to say that again. It's not about technology. It is about the appropriate use of technology to drive instruction for the student to get to where they need to for their own learning. Okay, but that's a critical component. And part of why I say this is, and the only way you can do that, is with data. Now, you're going to hear me say this over and over again. I'm a big data guy. If you're going to solve a problem, the first thing you got to do is gather what is the problem you're trying to solve. Then you look at how are you going to get to, instead of saying how you're going to get to it, you have to decide what's your desired outcome at the end. And then you got to use the data to make that decision, and then you choose your strategies to go from there to there. Without doing that process, you're throwing a coin into the wind, hoping it's going to land on its edge. And your data is just going to tell you, I've thrown 100,000 coins in the air. Never once has the coin ever landed on its edge. Oh, it's landed on the edge. It just doesn't stay there. Okay, so you have to understand data to know where you're going to get it. So what is it? What were we trying to do with our plan? And all this data, I'll make this presentation available to you, so you don't need to necessarily take any notes. I'll give it to you afterwards. Most everything I have here is on our website called drexel.dsj.org. Okay, so pretty much every document that's on your table, all that's available. And we want to share all this with the whole world because we think we have the success at Catholic schools in the United States. Just a statement, just throwing it out there. I thought there was a bigger reaction normally. Normally it's a big reaction. You guys are like way too much coffee. So what is it? We first of all, we figured we had to, we wanted to develop blended learning, and I'll explain that just for a second, what that blended learning. But we also felt we had to invest in teacher development. And it's not the teachers, all the teachers I know went to Catholic teachers, far and the majority of them, are really good teachers who want to learn more and do some stuff on their own. But they have been used to their own classroom, being a master of their own classroom. A principal can come by and suggest certain things, and they'll do it for a while, but then they go back to what they've always done. Because it's always worked. Well, let me say it has always worked to a certain extent. If we want to get to, I mean, what we're really good at in the Catholic school system, and actually in any school system, is the middle portion. Those who are really smart, we tend to put them in the corner. So we go, here's a book, go ahead and go do that. It's not really engaging them in any significant way. And those who fall behind, we go like, well, you need to go to public schools. We don't have resources for you. We try. We get the wings. We get the wings in each of them. But really, and it's not anyone's fault. It's not humanly possible as one teacher with 30 students to be able to do that. It's not. I will say, I marvel back at the days when the sisters ran the school. They had some 45 students in the classroom. I mean, I don't know how they did it. I mean, but they did, and they did a great job. So the only way to do this, only way to individualize or personalize the learning for the students who's got more needs, remedial, and those who have more needs, advanced, is through the use of technology. Unless you're going to add another teacher to the classroom and increase your cost, the only cost-effective way to do it is through the use of blended learning, is the use of technology. And so we want to teach the teachers how to do it. So we partner, like here, you guys are partnering with Creighton. We partnered with the Jesuit university to us, which is Santa Clara University. And we said to them, we need you to develop an Academy of Blended Learning. So back in 2011, they designed it. In 2012, we kicked it off. And all our 2013, we kicked it off. And we had all our teachers who switched from one to the other. They all went through a Blended Learning Academy during the summer and then continued throughout the entire year. I'm going to talk about all the details in a second. But increased Catholic identity, I think we have to double down. We have to challenge. And what I mean by this is really increasing the identity and saying and speaking about our Catholic. Like, this is largely what Tim talked about, the evangelization. Sometimes we have to name what we've always done and say, this is what we do, because we do it well. Like serving the poor, we do well. But we need to talk about it, because a lot of our generation don't get it anymore because they're not coming to church every Sunday. Around the country, you're talking about millennials are less than 20% come to church every Sunday. Less than 20%. And in fact, in some states in California, it's less than 15%. Now, my county is 13%. That's how you come to each Sunday. Whereas that, when I grew up, I mean, there was no, at least my house, I don't know what it's yours, but we didn't have a choice. Well, you went to church on Sunday unless you wanted to have food in the streets the next day, because that's the way it worked. But today, you don't have that set. So I'm going to talk about the new governance model, and then we'll talk about creating scholarships. That's the components of our model, right? And I'm going to talk about why it's important to do all of them, not just one. Because you've got to increase value to the parents who are going to put out money and make significant sacrifice for their children. And I think it's well worth the sacrifice, but you've got to increase the value and then communicate that increased value. So what is that? So what do we do? I think one of the things, I'm going to show you this, but it's sort of tongue in cheek, but it's important to understand that change isn't always readily accepted. I mean, we are, as human beings, sort of change adverse. We sort of resist. There's a sort of inertia against change, unless you engage them in sort of a fun way. All right, so let's look at this for a moment. I think I have to press this. I understand that, folks. I try to get that little logo off, but I better not give them credit where credit's due. So I understand. I don't want to necessarily talk about gamification of our learning, right? Although I think there's a value added to gamification of it. But I think we've got to be careful that when we make the change, we make it deadly. We've got to actually go back to. I mean, I don't know about you. When I suspect that all you're in education is because you had experience like I had. I really enjoyed learning. For learning's sake, I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed the whole enterprise of just learning for learning's sake. It almost didn't matter what I was learning about. Just, oh, this is awesome. Like, you learn about this, you learn about that. Keep going. When you enjoy something, it's not rocket science to figure out you're going to do it more. So finding a way to engage the students more in a way in which they enjoy it has got to be a desired outcome. And technology, look, just imagine, let's assume you don't have any technology in your classroom at all today. Now, I don't know about here, but in Silicon Valley, every child is playing with technology at home. All the time. It's crazy so. And you bring them into the classroom, and they have no access to anything. Now, just from their perspective, what do you think they're experiencing? Go to school again, there's no technology. It's like, seriously, like you have to write with your pen and paper? I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, now we can laugh about it, and we can complain about it, but unless we engage the students where they're at, you're not going to get them where you want them to be. We've got to meet them where they're at. And technology is not going to be, it's going to continue to be a part of our life. Now, I'm not about engaging technology just for fun's sake, although I want to use it to make sure that they have fun doing it. It's a way to an end. Tool. It's a tool to engage them so they can do a project on the computer, engage on the computer, so that they, unbeknownst to themselves, are learning. And we can do this. So, and here's the part about it is it really does make a difference. So we have to have this mindset that we have to change. The question is how much and where. It's not about if we're going to use technology. It's going to be how are we going to use the technology. It's not about if we're going to change the blended learning, but how are we going to implement blended learning. It's not if we're going to change the governance model. It's going to be how are we going to change the governance model. We got to have a mindset is that unless you want to go back to that curve, and you see, unless you do some strategic change and make that decision rapidly and decisively, you will find the system go down. And the law of economics, it just, you reach a tipping point and you can't get back up. You've lost the opportunity in the strategic zone. And I think you're in this diocese that recognize that, and so I'm encouraging you to do more. So now my definition of blended learning, and I'm going to pause in a couple minutes and then take a break because this one's heavy duty. So this one is super important because this is the best definition. It's not mine. This is by a guy called Brian Greenberg and Michael Horn. I'm sure you've heard those names. So Michael Horn is the guru of blended learning. And he worked with the Christian Institute for many years. Now he's broken off as a consultant. This doesn't make money for him, so he's gonna. But here, it's a formal program. So you define it. It isn't one teacher does one thing and another teacher does. So you've got to decide how we're going to do it as a school. Now I'm going to suggest you decide how you're going to do it as a system of schools, and this is how we're going to do it. And you say, okay, what is it? It's going to be a formal program. We're going to do X, and I'll tell you what we did. Now, some of it has to be online because otherwise it's not blended learning if it's online. So you've got to get them on there, and there's own ecosystem for these online programs, and I'll explain something about that in a few minutes. And where the student, this is the critical part. The student has control over at least some part of the time, place, path, and pace. So in other words, you give an assignment, like I have to say, like, I don't know about you, I remember as a kid, I did homework assignments, and they were all about repetition. Do them over so you learn them up. After doing so many, It didn't make any more difference how many more I did. I got it. Okay, so it would have been far more fun for me to go do a project to apply it, rather than just to do more and more and more and more and more and more. Now, some of it you have to do repetition to get, like multiplication tables. You just have to learn that off by heart. You have to learn the Lord's Prayer, period. There's just, you do it. The Hail Mary, you have to learn it, right? But for most of it, beyond that, it's about application knowledge. So the more that you have a student owning their control over the pace, place, and pace, then the more they are going to actually internalize what they're learning, because they're the one controlling it. They're not any different than adults. You tell an adult what to do. Let me give you a really silly example. Have you ever traveled with your spouse to a certain location all the time? And you keep going, but you're never the driver, you're the passenger. And one day your spouse can't drive or something happens, you get in the car and you're going like, I don't know where to go. How do I go there? Why can't you go there? You've been there 20, 30 times. Why couldn't you not go there? Why? Because you weren't in control. You weren't in control. You weren't taking note of what was on. You were just following along. You never took note of anything. When you're in control and you're in charge, you're going to remember where you did. There's a gas station on the right. Did you go left past the gas station? You remember everything. That's a really simple example. But it really, that's the path and pace and control that I'm talking about. If you don't have that for your child, they get the same thing. When they leave school, it's like, well, no, Father Brendan's not here. I don't know what we do. I don't know. Wow, I don't know. And they'll do that. I'm sure you got more. Anyway, so part of it has to be autonomous, part of it has to be supervised, part of it is a brick and mortar, and part of it is at home. So the modalities of this, in other words, you're blending a little of each, right? You're taking a little the best of both worlds, hopefully, and you come up with a system. Now, at the end, what you're trying to get is each child has his or her own learning path. That this is where they take ownership of where they're going, and they can see the progress of where they're going. They themselves, you're not measuring it. They themselves are measuring it. They themselves are taking ownership. They've got to get to here. They got to get to here. It's like when they play a game. They manage how you look at all the games they play on the computer. They get on that computer. They figure it out very fast, on their own, without any instruction manuals. Will you ever take up a game in those computers and say, okay, how does it work? First thing we ask. The kids go, what do you mean? Just do it. Just go on, they trial and error, doing this. They're not afraid to fail when it comes to games. But we've made education such a hostile environment that when they fail, they get this crushing impact. And it doesn't come from us as educators. It most often comes from their parents. Well, how did you get it? How did you fail? I don't understand how you failed. When I was growing up, failure was a good thing because you were going to expect it to learn from it. And then you would advance the next time and you would move up. If you're always getting everything right, then what does that tell you as educators? You're not trying hard enough. You're not expanding. You're not growing. You've got no growth pattern. If you're getting everything right all the time, we have not in any way challenged you yet. We're just feeding you stuff and you're giving it back to us. It's not real growth. So let's just summarize it. So high quality blended learning comes down to is personalized. It's for me, Brendan, Mary, Joe, Juan, Carlos, Maria. Right? It's about me, and it's me taking mastery of my own skill, of these skills, and then it has high expectations. I mean, this isn't about doing what we've always done. We're getting you on a growth path. And the word, I'm going to use this over and over again, it's about growth. It's not about stats. It's about growth. You're going to get the child to grow from one place to the next. And then finally, the student takes ownership of its own. And their own path. So what? And I'm going to stop here and I'm going to give you a break because I promised I'd stop after an hour and then we'll take a break. But let me just leave you with this, and then we're going to come back and then explain what do we do, and we'll need I'm going to take a short break so that you can get your legs. But because I'm going to go over what do we do and why do I think this is something that you guys should try here. Okay. So this is roughly, we said. Again, the superior system, and what is it? First of all, we train the principals. And then we trained the teachers. And again, we partnered with Santa Clara University. You guys got a partnership here at Creighton, so it seems like it's already in place. But what is it for? It was blended learning and management for the principals. But we found out that the principals, while they were great educators, they had not actually been formally educated in the ways of managing the school in the ways that you would manage, let's say, in the business world. People, they didn't get this because now they learned some things, but they didn't get into the so our coursework is practicums. It's immersion and practicum. So they deal with real problems and they bring the real problems. It's highly collaborative, and it's not, Santa Clara is not the only university doing this. I'm sure Creighton has something that and many others have around the country. So what we were aiming at is demonstrating student learning. We want to be able, now originally I will say here we had academic achievement. Our first donor says we want to increase learning by 20%. Okay, I took the money and said, I'll figure that out later. But really they didn't know what they were asking any more than I knew what they were saying, to be honest with you. They just want the growth. They're used to funding charter schools where you take in low performing students and you can get a 20% pop of growth. But when you've got students already, within the range, you might be able to get 1 year pop of 20%, but you can't get that year over year over year, because otherwise you'd end up having all geniuses. They'd all be graduating 8th grade at 5th grade. That's not the way it is. That's not the way it's going to work. So we came up with some new models, and I'll speak a little bit about that. But then so what we came up with is our blended learning model is a station rotation model. Okay, now the reason why we embrace a station, there's lots of different blended learning models. Okay, so you can have a flipped classroom. Flipped classroom is basically the students do it at home. You get the instruction at home, you do the work in class. Instead of their homework is doing the exercise at home, their homework is to watch you on a video or watch some video about the exercise, and then you come in and you help them do the plan. You have to help them do their homework in class. That's a flipped classroom. Okay. You have a flex classroom where you have a portion of the class is in a computer lab and portion of class is in one-on-one. Then you have a lab model where they sent off to a lab and they come back. And then the flex model is probably the most controversial. It's kind of, the teachers are kind of arbiters around the sides. They don't really do any instruction. None of those really matched, I felt, Catholic school, even though flipped classroom has its use, and I think we all use a little bit of it. We found the station rotation model is the best. We divided the classroom into 3 stations. The first station, let's say we have a group of 30 kids in a class. The first station is a 1-on-10, the teacher doing the lesson as they would normally have done the lesson. While another 10 is on their individual personalized learning online. And it's its own ecosystem. They enter into that. If they are doing very well, they get advanced forward. If they're not doing well, they go back. It controls them where they're at. This next student next to them would not know where they're at. So there's no sort of self-consciousness. If they have to go back and do some remedial work, the student next to them would never know it. So there's no shame to that. That's the good thing. And then you've got a project-based station. And the project-based station is applying the learning you've done in the other 2 areas. And this is the critical science behind this, is when you do that project-based, and the project isn't a class, it isn't like a one session project. Oftentimes it might be a half a trimester or a full trimester project, which they have to apply all the math skills that they've done for the entire trimester. Let me give you a really simple one that if children are learning how to do arithmetic and percentages and stuff like that, you give them a project to design a restaurant menu and fill the restaurant up with customers and tell us how much profit you made at the end of the day. So they make up menus, they try to design the restaurant, they put it online, they design it, they get the menus, they got pizza at this price, that price. Then they go, well, how many customers we had? We had 7 tables of 4. They got how much they get, they charge this, they get how much tax, how much tip do they get, this is how much are costs of good, how much does an apple cost? And they go, that's a big project. You can't do that on your own, you do that as a group. And you design that and sign that. Now, that's a very simple one. There's much grander projects than that. And you can, this is the component where you infuse the Catholic values. And you can make the project, well, you know, what about the homeless person who comes in? What are you going to do? You're not going to give away any meals to that person. Or you could, you know, enter lots of, you could give a project that's a little bit more religious instead of giving it a project at a restaurant. And there's lots of creative ways. Right, so that's that station rotation model. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that project-based is impacted. I'm going to pause there for just, why don't we stop there? Because it's a natural, it's not really quite a natural break, but let's pause there, give you an, let's say, what time is it now? 1:15. So can we say 10 minutes? Is that enough? So 10 minutes back, we'll give you a shot. So 1:15, come back at 25 after. Yeah, well, that's great. Just go from my slides.
This is the summer camp too. There is a business model. No joke.
Yeah, that was the same.
No. Did you capture it? I haven't been looking, so I don't know if, I guess there it is.
It won't let you pause, so I'll have to go back and edit like the.
You just asked the question.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll go back and cut it.
That's easy to do when you got it's just a lot of memory.
Okay. Yeah.
Are you going to live stream it, or are you going to just stream? You're saying it is being live streamed.
It is being live streamed.
But nobody's trying to watch it.
I would imagine. I don't know that anybody got it.
I don't know how it was communicated.
Well, yeah.
I don't either. I was just told to set this.
Right, but the nice thing about live stream when you use it, that's YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just keep the record. You got about a couple hours before you capture it. And
It
then
says 8 hours.
8 hours. Then you basically capture it and hold on to it. And put it, then you put it onto your server. You're fine. That's it. We do the same in the church. We do live streaming of our masses, and then whenever we want to, we hold on to it. Sometimes we do. Funerals, we do. People want funerals.
You know, that would be really nice.
It says a keepsake.
Yeah. Yeah, I record all my homilies, and I type those out and send them out audio and text. But people want, a lot of people never get, to see it. It feels like they're there when they can see and be part of it, especially when it's live. But then every now and then people are out of town to hear about the homily. That's something different about seeing it versus. So when we keep it, we only keep the homily because the mass is the mass. But sometimes it's a beautiful song for a funeral. Some people want that recorded, so we have that, and then we just click out that song and we can listen to it.
We just on one of these channels, there's like mass for shut in. That's all. I think you're really good.
Right. That's all. That's good. Yeah.
I was reticent about it. I've had it set up for quite some time, but we just went public with it. Hasn't been because I've given that to all the homebound people. So they knew when they were tuning in. I already have about 15, people who use it. But now that they have, I'm always nervous about encouraging home.
Do you still have it?
Yeah.
We need to.
I think you get me too. That's why I told you.
I was wondering.
The reason why I told you, I figured whoever came and I said,
Well, it was us. You.
so that way, at least, otherwise I take them out of my thing when I'm done. But at least that way you have your own.
You You still need to get it? Okay. Actually, I'm probably gonna stay. I thought I would, but I think I'm gonna stay because I can sit on my. It's in the back.
You back her?
Oh, I love that.
I took a plane ride.
I did get an upgrade, so I'm not even playing.
Extra space upgrade? How tall are you?
6'5". Well, I've had 2 back surgeries. No, I used to say flesh and bone, but not just flesh and bone. Flesh and bone, a lot of metal. I had 2 10-inch bars in my back. Well, I fractured my spine, but it was good. But I didn't know I fractured it. I was just in a lot of pain for a lot of years. It was fun, right?
You played college?
Yeah, I played in high school, elementary school, high school, and college. Very competitive. I played at the University of Wichita in South Africa. That paid me. Whoever paid me the most that day. I'd like to say I played the best for those who paid me the most. It wasn't always the case. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, 4 months down in South Africa. Fun when you're young and free. I went on a couple of trips. Really very. Shot out 6 times.
So the back injury was the good one.
Yeah, I was just, I mean, I'd like to have a more dramatic story on it, but that's nothing compared to
Oh my gosh, my fingers. I'm sorry. No, that's okay. I'm like, oh my gosh. No, but we just got to figure out. Salt Lake City has been
All the logistics of the thing. Are producing similar. Yeah, and we've lost students for that. Oh yeah. Like her. My 8-year-old wants to go to school. We found it yesterday. They can't.
We found out yesterday they can't work Halloween. And Bill might be doing it.
We're actually like Sophie, you're searching on Pinterest right now for like what could be a staff. See, that was
That's
actually
what
Tyler's
Tyler's friends are going to be. And Molly just make her own costume. And then we found out yesterday all of a sudden we
That's a really new word to staff.
where was yellow t-shirts.
Yeah.
So Molly's going to make them a whole big, like, big circle.
Yeah. That's a really new word now, but it's like, yeah, is there any papers? I have to like,
Well, but if I do that, then I'm going to feel like the hostage
it's so weird. Yeah. Like, I'm gonna do that a year out. Like, hey, this year's our last year.
Yeah.
But yes.
Right. The walking.
Like,
Well, I wrote in my notes.
but it's last year.
Oh, yeah.
My only issue is they said you now it's so it's just
My voice is travesty.
I mean, Bryce was this summer was Lego Ninjago Man suit that he was going to wear. No. Well, now you know Star Wars.
Oh, okay. You haven't watched it. That's the one.
It's the kind of moment. Yeah, actually, Bryce did.
Okay, let's gather on back to the tables. I guess I could have been using this all along, right? I'll leave that on. Okay. So what were some of the key objectives? And again, I've stated this just to write it down for your own, is we want to create this system, efficient schools, that you have to help make decisions and have operational efficiency is important. So let me explain what I mean by that. So when you create a system, the part of every system, you have to make a decision on what are you going to centralize, and what are you going to standardize but keep local, and then what are you going to just keep local, right? And you've got to make that decision constantly over and over again. If you sit with the decision, and this is the way we're going to do it forever, that's not a good system. The system constantly has to look at, is this the right way it needs to be? Is this what's necessary? So let me tell you some of our learning examples. So at the very beginning, obviously teaching needs to be local. I mean, that's sort of obvious. Possibly it could be some centralized component of resources, right? So we came up with a blended learning or an ed tech specialist who goes from teacher to teacher to helping. And that's a centralized service resource that goes to the local sites. We standardize the methodology, the station rotation, but it's implemented locally. But let me tell you something that we centralized. We centralized IT right out of the gate. And the reason why we centralize IT, and I'm a former IT exec, right? So I get this more than most, is that it is so hard to keep up with. You can't, typically what happens is you get some parent or some friend of the principal who knows, sets all this up, and then they get moved, and we don't have any passwords, we don't know the topology network, it's a disaster. And also they use their products, what they think is good. And that may not actually be the top. So what we did is not only did we centralize, but we also outsourced, because I did not want to actually supervise this, even though I knew the marketplace. It's so changing so fast, even I can't keep up with it. So we centralized it and outsourced it, and we have an RFP in which that company has to repeat every 3-year contract. He's right now in the middle of renegotiating contract. He's not doing very well on negotiating. He's going to get what he got, otherwise we'll find another company. There's lots of companies in Silicon Valley who did this. But he and his company have done a phenomenal. We could never have got to where we got without centralized IT. There's just simply no way. They were able to deliver 24/7, 24/7 support IT. They were able to get all the networks up to the exact standardizing. So if your Wi-Fi hotspot went out or your access point went out, they came in, they just plugged that one out, plugged another one in. Why? Because they had 10, because they were standardized everywhere across the entire system. We standardized in IT the iPads, and they're all remotely controlled devices. We have what's known as the MDM, mobile device manager. Every single one has an individual ID. We know where that is as soon as it gets on the internet, where it is, and who's using it, and what's happening on it. Now, parents, kids might not like it, parents like it. Now, can you find a way to hack off it? Yeah, but that's a violation. If you do that, you lose the iPad. You might even get kicked out of school. So you have to have, users agreement. So these are standardization which you've got to do, and then you got to implement. They have to be implemented locally. The teacher has to get every parent to sign that user agreement and have that back before they get their iPad. So things like that, you've got to standardize and centralize. Another example where we learned and we had to switch. Originally, we thought standardizing your bank of accounts was enough. We had a standard policy at the diocese that we use QuickBooks across the entire system. There's standardized chart of accounts across the system, including schools. But when we went in to collect all those and try and consolidate our 7 schools, we were a little bit befuddled because our controller couldn't quite understand why certain things were happening. Well, when we burrowed down into the QuickBooks, nobody was really using them the right way. So then we started to examine who was putting it in. So let's say you were the person at the parish, at the school who was doing data entry. Know absolutely nothing about accounting. You're not a qualified accountant, you're just a secretarial support. We discovered that we had non-accounting people putting all this stuff into the all the codes were wrong. It meant nothing. It was absolutely useless data. We couldn't consolidate, so we let go of everyone who was involved in accounting, and we outsourced a company who then placed the person. We changed the entire system. Now we went from standardization to centralization, part standardization. And again, you got to keep moving. It depends where the problem is. You got to move wherever the problem is and address it. So that's what I'm saying. It's not, I can't give you a single sheet and say, this is what you need to do. You have to decide what's going to work best for your diocese and what works best for your system, whatever system you set up. That has to be a smart, the feedback has to be, there has to be feedback loop. You can't expect the principals to do everything. The principals have to have some resources, and they have to be able to go to somebody who they consider an expert to help implement what you're asking them to implement. Okay, so there has to be. So that's what I mean by efficiency here. So look, we want full capacity. We all want full seats. I get that. But you've got to have a plan to get there. One of the ways to get there is understanding the cost parity. This term has been thrown around, but this is the term student parity, cost per student parity. Is some of the public or the private schools in our area, they know how much it costs per student. I bet your schools don't know how much it costs per student to educate, or it's completely variable, and it's variable from 1 year. Because how do you make up your budgets? Well, I can't give you that answer, Father Brennan, because well, it depends how many students I have. Because if I have 100 students, it costs this. If I have 200 students, it costs twice the price. Okay, so that's not a good system. That's budgeting based upon how many numbers will we get students? That's how most schools do their budget in our diocese. Is they put, how many students do you think we'll get next year? We'll get 225, great, that's our budget. Okay, so in the business world, you have to meet targets. We need 230 to make the schools viable. We have to get 230. What do we need to do? We have to do what we need to do to get 230, because that's our break-even point. You base a budget on a number of students that you're gonna make it work. Now you might say, is 230 is what we need. We're at 200 now, we're at 150 now. Over the next 3 years, we're going to get to 230, and here's how. That's a planning document. If you don't do that, you're not really serious about increasing enrollment. All you're doing is, we're really trying our hardest, Father Brennan, we're really trying to make this work, we're doing everything. No, you're not doing everything because you haven't planned it. If you haven't written down a plan of what you're going to meet and what you're doing to meet those targets, then you do not have a plan. What you're doing is hoping and praying, and we're really good at praying, but it's not going to bring in the students. So it's not going to do it. So that's that part. Okay, so let me explain this new governance model. So here this is the most important slide of all. I think it's really important, so maybe not the most. So under Drexel schools, it's a systemically governed. No longer. So in most schools, the pastor is in charge of the principal, right? The principal reports to the pastor, and the superintendent of the diocese is on the side. They're there for an advice, make sure that they're all doing the education things right. But technically speaking, they have actually no authority over the pastor or over hiring the principal. Is that the same here? It's canonically, it's whatever you're doing it differently. Canonically, that's the way it's designed. Okay, right? So what we do is we flip that. The pastor is the one who has jurisdiction over all things pastorally. spirituality, engaged in that. But the supervisor of the principal is the superintendent, in our case, the assistant superintendent, head of Drexel Schools. She is the resource. She meets with them. She helps them be the best principals and finds out what are all the issues on an operational, educational level, on spiritual level. Father meets with the principal. It frees the pastor up to do what they were actually ordained to do. I know it sounds sort of obvious, but it should be completely liberating for a pastor. Not always, because they think it's important to be in charge, and they get caught up with that as opposed to being in charge spiritually. So there is a bit of a challenge on the perception of loss of power. But power over somebody is not a good power. You want power by influence, power with. That's always a better position to be in. If you've got power over somebody, that isn't always a good thing. So I'll advocate for this. So the difference in funding is every parish is on their own. They're an island. They succeed or fail based upon their own ability to be able to raise money or not raise money. This one is different. I fundraise for the system. So far, I've raised $15 million for the system. I went out, get those donors, but my donors are sophisticated donors. They're donors who want data. Their donors are not going to give to an individual parish and a pastor is going to do whatever he wants. They want accountability. So we have a board of governance. Our board of governance is a board of trustees, and I'll explain who's on that board in a couple of seconds to know that it's a well-represented board. We use data instruction, and our instruction is blended learning, data-driven instruction. Whereas at the school, that is a parish school, it could be or might not be. A principal could be really advanced to be doing great stuff with data blended learning, but we don't know. If they can afford it, they generally do it. If they can't, they don't. Resources, the system has a whole slew of resources. I'll go through exactly what we have in that. A whole slew of resources that we give to the principals and the teachers to be successful. We don't just tell them they've got to do this and then leave them on their own. We give them the resources to be successful. And finally, this is the most controversial of all. We changed the compensation system. We call it BLESS, and I'll explain in a second. It's called Blended Learning Instructional Salary Scale. They can get up to 15% bonus based on targets they meet. 5% the first year, 10% the second year, 15% the third year. Now, sadly, even with the 15%, they're only getting what public school teachers get. Just understand that. We're not like paying them astronomical salaries, just to be clear about that. It's all relative, right. I will say you have to be very careful. I'm going to speak about this slide in a little more detail. Very, very careful about incentives, financial incentives in particular. They are not the greatest motivator. Okay, just understand that. Your teachers currently are not teaching in Catholic schools because of the finances, right? Priests are not doing their job in school and parishes because of the finances. That's just simply that. Any business school will tell you that people are not motivated solely by money. It is not the number one. You know what the number one motivator is? That's it. Somebody tell them they're doing a good job. Most in particular, who is the person who should tell them they're doing a good job? The boss is one, but you know what's number one above the boss? Peers. Wow, you're a great teacher, so you do that. Oh my God, I never even thought about that. You go away like, oh. Believe it or not, that is the number one, business-wise. It's not just not Catholic. Business-wise, the number one motivator is peer recognition. Number two is boss recognition. Number three is finances. Number three, finances. It says you've got to pay them a decent wage. They have to have a fair wage. If they are so far below market, they will always look. It's what's known as a dissatisfier. They will always look to the money and say, "I'm not even getting paid enough." It's a dissatisfier. When they're unhappy, they'll always point to the money. But so I think one of the struggles we have, why we've got to pay them a little bit more, because I don't think we're paying them enough. Public school teachers aren't getting paid a lot, by the way, just to be clear. Just so that we're not like we say we're 80% of what they are. They're not getting paid enough for their job. So for us to be only 80% them, that's just, you know, I agree it's educate. We can't increase the cost because then we'll bust the whole system. But if you can do it on some way to do it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, so that's it. So let's talk about how it does and what's that shift look like, and what's our experiences. Now, look, I will say that we made some really big mistakes in doing this. And I will say, like I was explaining to a couple of people at the break, I don't know if any of you ever watch cross-country racing. You ever watch cross-country racing? I mean, in the cars. Do you even know that sport here? No, not really. Okay, so it's in Ireland. It's famous all over Ireland because we got the great roads to drive. We love to do it in Ireland. Oh, we love to do it. So what they do ahead of time is it's cross-country. So they got the cars are really low down. You can imagine they're like golf cars. You know, the Volkswagen Golf, or those are all low seating cars, and they can go. They're very nimble because they can hug the road. They're very small, narrow roads. But they've always got a co-driver and a driver. And what they do is they go ahead of the road before the race. They mark every single corner, every single bump in the road is marked down and gauged. So the co-driver is saying, right, they're doing it, 41, do it. They're right, and you just hear you can't make head nor tail of what they're saying, but they're gearing up, gearing down, into going out of the corner. That's the way cross-country driving works. And it's awesome to watch. Well, I feel like we kind of were driving cross-country, but I was like, faster is better. Woo! Yeah! Boom! Everyone else in the car wasn't sharing my enthusiasm. I was holding the steering wheel. Their heads were hitting the ceiling. They were getting thrown around the back of the car, and I'm going like, "What are you talking about? This is awesome! We're going full speed!" And go like, "I feel sick." And I think kind of what we did, we made so many changes so fast, so hard. We definitely banged some people around. Now, some people probably, no matter what we've done, would have been banged, would never want to do the change anyway. So I get that, but we certainly have learned our lessons on what to do, what not to do. But there was no roadmap. We had no road. We were going across the country with no road. We were doing our own road. There's no map. So we were just saying, hey, we'll go across. Hey, let's just go across the field. So what was it? So we changed it to pass, as I said, to the school system. But the executive team was a critical component of our leadership team. It was a CFO, Bob Savente, who since passed away just this year, unfortunately, very sadly, very suddenly. He was a great partner in this. The CFO and the superintendent, Kathy Amazol, of us formed a team. We met every week for 3 to 4 hours without fail, every single week. And we met on all matters of operation, all matters of education, all matters of fundraising. We were the team. We were the executive team of the board. Now, our board members, we hired a superintendent who then became part of the executive team, who became a fourth member team, who was really kind of the action person. But here's the board. The board is appointed by the bishop, and it's a unique board. We're accountable to the board. Of course, the board's accountable to the bishop, right? But the bishop has said, you're going to run this place. Don't come back to me with problems. Solve the problems yourself. So fundamentally, it's a operational, it's really jurisdictional board. Even technically canon law, it is not. The board, the bishop is given the full authority to run the system. Now, why would he do such a radical thing? Well, first of all, he had the superintendent, the vicar general, and the CFO in the controlling the seat. So we were the ones driving it. So he had a little bit of control with the three of us. Maybe not the speed. He didn't realize we were driving so fast, but we got there. We have 4 educators. We have a principal of a parish school, non-Drexel school. We have 2 of the high school principals. Now, why do we have that? Our high schools are very high function, because if you think about it, where do our kids go? They go to high school, right? So you need to understand what is the desired product at the end you want to have. You better be listening really carefully to those principals. They're the one taking in our product. We already knew one of the reasons, motivated reasons for this, is that our math scores were appalling. I knew that as a math major myself. I looked at the way we taught math and I said, this is just ridiculous. This is just not the way we teach math. So we have pulled up, and I'll show you some of the results. We focused on math because that was my big bugaboo. But it really, but everybody inside the system knew that. The high schools knew it. Even the superintendent knew it, that we needed to work on it. But she didn't have any control over the schools to change it. She could suggest changes to each individual principal, but there was no authority. With this, we changed the system. We changed the block schedule, and we basically said, we're going to do this. And you'll see the results are just outstanding. We had two religious, the other educator, is the professor from the University of Santa Clara, one of our professors there who's in the Department of Education. The two religious was Daughters of Charity, the head of the Daughters of Charities in actually the whole Western province. They have a huge initiative that they do for the poor kids in school, for school education. So the Daughter of Charity, Sister Julie's in charge of that, is on our board. One of their schools is currently in our system, and the second school that they have will be probably coming in this year. And then the second one was a pastor, a non-Drexel school pastor. Okay. And then we had three business people. Each of these one was a former COO of SanDisk, a big multinational company, a former CFO of Siebel, a huge international billion-dollar company. He's the chair of the board. And then a former partner, Ernst & Young. Three big business execs. And then one education expert, he's the head of all Apple education for the internationally. And so he's on our board. And then finally, the last one is a parent representative from one of our Drexel schools. So let me tell you a little about the mix. The important mix is there's educators, there's business people, and there's religious. And that's an important mix to have. It was deliberate, that was not accidental. And that's important because that conversation constantly needs to happen. I will say that I use this metaphor all the time about the business people. When business people, and you'll see this right around the country, when business people come in to help schools and they form these non-jurisdictional boards or even jurisdictional boards, and they don't understand schools or why schools are so run so inefficiently. Come in and make changes, cuts, and it's so hard to hear it because we who are in the religious, or if you're an educator, you're an educator, go like, oh, no, don't touch that. That's the sacred cow. Don't do that. And part of it is they don't understand some things. Part of it is we don't understand what they're trying to do. So there has to be a genuine dialogue. So these three business people come into us and dialogue with, help us to get the business best practices. But there has to be a step down. And let me explain what I mean by that. Most of these little devices run on little DC batteries, right? Direct current batteries, little batteries, right? And of course, your computer, this here works on AC, right? If I plug this into this, electronics in this, completely. AC does not work with DC. You have to have a converter. Now, inside your laptops, we forget about this because inside your laptop, you have an in-built-in converter already inside. You don't realize it, but it's in there, right? That's where it is. It gets in your plug socket, and that little thing that's a converter. You put in AC, and out comes DC, right? So we here in this country have 110 AC. And most of the devices are operated at 5 volts. Most of these little devices work for no more than 9 volts, but there's some 12 volt. In Europe, it's 240 volt. So you got a higher step, a bigger step down. So why do I bring that up? If you bring your AC and you plug it into a DC device, you fry the electronics irreparably. It just fry. And bringing in these business people and plugging them straight into the education, into Catholic organizations, period. But even more so into Catholic education. You'll fry the electronics of the parish. You fry the organization completely. And what we've got to do, and we've got to own this together, is you have to have a conversion technique. You've got to listen to them and say, I understand, what are you trying to communicate? And you step down conversion, convert it into DC and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Now, equally, when we're speaking back to them, we got to step up. This is what we're trying to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and then how would that work in the business world? And we have to own that conversion process, that transformation, that what we call a transformer, a step-down transformer. Now, I will say that we got these three executives. They are like high-powered business people. I mean, the guy who's a former COO. I mean, he ran multi-billion-dollar plants all over the world. So when he comes out and says, I need some help, Jose, on doing this. He comes out with charts. He goes, it's like, it frightens me. I put that in front of an educator. They get glossed over eyes. And you can see them, they just go into this hypnotic trance. And it just says, oh, I'm sorry I asked. I mean, you can see it on their face. But they really did want help. But it was just too much. Now, Jose, I love him. He's on my parish council. Both of these guys, they're not just US 110. They're not even European 240. They're industrial cent 480, 960. And you've got to, if you bring these people onto your boards, you've got to own that conversion process. Because if you don't do that, you're going to fry the organizational leadership. And I think what happened was that I tried to own this as best I could. We needed to own it completely as a team. They needed to own it, and we needed to own it. Now, we do own it now, but the first 2 years, we were like, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? People were just getting fried. So that's what I'm saying. Lessons learned, but it's a powerful board. It's exhausting. So what do they do? So here, they're both administrative, operation, and financial. They put out, every parish, they have to put together our own budget. We have a controller who works for them. So we have a controller who works on but every one of the sites has to put together a budget with a plan. You can't just say, I'm going to have 240 kids. How many do you have now? 140. Well, how are you going to cover, where are you going to, what's your plan for 140? I know we were going to pray really hard. That's not a plan. Okay, so they have to put together. So each budget, each school is approved individually. Review analytics to effective, we have different subcommittees on the board. One goes over as mission schools, is in charge of the analysis of the data that comes back on the student system. So what are we doing to drive curriculum, drive instruction, and are we selecting the right tools, as in the right software? And we have a whole selection process for that part of it. They don't necessarily do all of this, they just make sure it has to happen. So we have subcommittees all over the place to do this. There's simply no way you can do this at an individual parish. Trust me, there's just no way. That's why. And we monitor it, of course, and then, of course, we evaluate my fundraising, because I always say it's my fundraising, because nobody else does the fundraising except me. So the irony is they evaluate me and evaluate how well I'm doing. Thank you very much. But it's important. You can't do it without money, so you've got to have a plan. So then, I mentioned this earlier, standard chart of accounts. We have consistent reporting now. We follow the GAP standard. That's important for us because that was kind of a step up to conversion. It meant that we had more access. Once we used QuickBooks, you got a lot more standardized people, a lot more business people use that in the business world, and they use GAP. So therefore, you're going to have access to a whole lot more volunteers. If you just use your own system, it's just very hard to get volunteers because then they have to learn your system and they just go, they just can't operate. So this is where we do have to step up into kind of the AC world. And of course, we insist that every parish has to have a finance council. Every school has to have a finance council and an advisory council. And they have to give us the names, and those names have to be real. Oh, we laughed. The first year we did this, and I got names, and we called them. One was dead. 4 of them hadn't been in the parish in 6 years. It's just a tad dishonest, right? That principle didn't stay. So establishment of board. So this is what we've done. We've got clear communication or a vision. We've established the board of trustees. We constantly roadmap out where we're going, what we're doing. We try to abundantly communicate what we're trying to do. Operational structure is in place, and we're trying to continue. We have an operating plan. If you want to see it, it's on the website, Drexel DSJ. We publish it. We have 4 pillars that we are using for our action plan. We have a strategic plan, and we have an annual report that we've just done a three-year annual report, and then we're going to be publishing our annual report this month. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the role of the advisory board that works in with this?
So each of the local one, the parish, the school one. So the school one, so it's part of their plan to this blended learning instructional. Let me explain a little bit about this because it all ties together. So each principal has to come up with its own plan for that school regards to what it needs to do. We give them plans regards to what they need to do on blended learning and structured learning, but every school's got to come up with its own plan because it's got its own local issues. That's what the school advisory council does. And the finance council should help them make sure they basically can afford to finance that. So for example, at my school, they wanted to grow the pre-K, right? So we have a large pre-K, but they also wanted to have some coding. Kids want to do coding, the after school program from coding. Well, none of the other schools need to do that. So that's where our advanced school. They also, big portion of the advisory, local advisory, is helping enrollment. Your number one salespeople for your school is the current parents. I mean, that's the number one way to get more students in there, is parents speaking about how good it is. So they have a role in helping, not necessarily day-to-day management, but the strategy about where they want to go, visioning and execution. And they can help pretty significantly on like fundraising and on developing plans, and then what is it specific to that local school that they feel they need. Like one of our schools needs a lot of English language skills for their students, so that they have a whole parent group, part of their advisory, that helps with the after school program for that. And that's a huge portion of it. That's kind of pretty much all they do at that school, because that's their big need. Does that make sense? I mean, they have to be involved in the planning. We have, a huge portion of it is also responding to the accreditation process. So they have to have a group that's a parent and faculty that have to be involved in that. So you can set goals, but we set a certain amount of goals to a school, but we want them to set goals themselves locally. So that's part of how. Now we do have a process, a formal operation process, and we have a formal evaluation. This is called 5D+. 5D+ is a tech done through Santa Clara. I'm sure that they have it here in Creighton too. Is the ability to be able to evaluate the teacher, the principal evaluate the teacher, meet the goals of what they're doing. We've also got part of that is blended learning, and part of that, the plus, is religious education. So it's all of that, the teacher's getting evaluated on that. So we introduced this wasn't in place, so we introduced it. So every one of our teachers has a standardized evaluation of which they know that they have to meet certain goals. And so it's all written out, they agree to the goals, and then they're measured against those goals. Now, what we're doing this year is we're introducing the blended learning blast. We introduced it last year. This year is the first year it's going to operation, because you can't measure somebody against something they didn't know about. So we spent all last year promulgating the plan, and this year, now they've got their goals, the plan is to get measured against that. So this year we're only focusing on site only. So the site goals, if all the site meet their goals, then everyone at that site will get a 5% increase, a 5% bonus to their salary. The following year, they'll have the site goals, and then they'll have a classroom goals. And if they meet that goal, they have 5% and another 5%. And then we'll have a third year where the 5%, 5%, and the third 5% is for individual growth for themselves, as well as in the classroom growth. So there's a little combination the last 2 years. And we're working all of that right now. We're in the middle of designing the last year. We have the first year designed, the next 2 years we're in the middle of designing. This was received really, really well by the teachers at first. Oh, 5% increase. They said, well, how do I get it? And then they realized all the goals, and then they were okay once they understood it. Once they understood all the goals, it wasn't just about them performing, but that them performing in this particular class with this particular students. Because we don't just arbitrarily say you got to reach a certain goal, and every student has to get there, because every class is different, right? Some students come back and they're way, way further behind. You can't hold that teacher accountable to bring a student. Let's say a student comes into second grade or reading at the beginning of first grade level. Well, you can't expect that teacher to get that up to all the way to the end of second grade level. Now, if she does, she's phenomenal. But what would be reasonable is to get them up to the middle of second grade level and a little bit higher by the end of the school year if they can. But that's a goal. That's a pretty significant growth path. Because remedial is harder, and the further your years go on, the harder that remedial gets. So at the first to second grade, that you might be able to pull up. When you move to fourth or fifth grade, you've lost so many building blocks, it's very hard to pull them up. So there's a step up that you got to work. It's pretty complicated. That's why this becomes actually really complicated to implement. And you can't, and again, remember, we're going to have to change it as years go on, because we know fine well that if they reach the goals, then everybody's up at this level. They can't keep expecting to grow, right? So we got to keep changing it to make sure that they get.
Do you have anything beyond the pay scale, such as like calling people, I don't know, like a lead teacher?
So we have merit badges. We call them merit badges. So we have a merit badge system. So every month we award 2 teachers a Drexel School Board Award. But we're developing what we call micro badging. We finished it, but that's what we're working with Santa Clara, is micro badges. So when they get a course finished, they get a little micro badge, and they finish this, they get micro badge. So you get accumulation after so many micro badges, they get this. And that's what you've done. That's the way forward, really, is the micro badging and the peer recognition of that. So if you get so many of those, then you get to go to another conference, or you get to that. So there's some recognition, but it's complex. It's very complex. Yes.
Are all the goals based on academic
No.
performance?
No, it's not all part. It's I could give you the form. It's a complex form. It's I think I want to say 40% is academic, but all of it is classroom management, and you got a lot. There's lots of components to it, but there is a portion. It might be 35% is academic, because that's important. But if you do all the rest, academic performance moves up with it. That's the challenge, of course. Right. Let me move on. So I think I spoke about this. I want to kind of get to some of the more data before we run out of time. So I mentioned this. This is all outsourced to IT, and it's all outsourced. We have 24/7 support. Again, we could never pull this off without the Knivel. This was really critical to our success in the early days. The MDM, that's a mobile device manager, helps us take care of the computers remotely and controls them. We have all the configuration of those accounts come straight from the system, and they get delivered to the classroom with the kids' names on them. It's all done by the system. So when you get into the classroom, the only thing you got to do is make sure you got the right roster in your class when they arrive. If you don't have the right ROM, that's what some teachers, when they, oh, well, I didn't get the right computers, are all wrong. I said, well, let's see what you put in. Well, I didn't know I was meant to put that in. Whatever you put in, you get out. That's usually the way it works. So that's what you have to do. We did this as well. I don't know if this is that. We have our own cloud in our diocese. I'm not sure it's necessary for every diocese to do this. We do it at the early days when Google would not certify that they would not plumb the data for our students. They wouldn't certify them. In fact, I read their documentation, and they basically said they would. They actually categorically said it in the text of their users agreement, which none of us ever read, right? As they said, they will go to your data, and any exceptions for children. Your data, whatever you have in your Google Docs, your emails, anything you give on a Gmail, G Drive, that's all their property, not yours. Just be very careful about what that means. So when the NSA when they had their problems at NSA and they got all that, they published that, and they said they will no longer do it for children. So if you use your children, they will not plumb the data. So now we start using Google Docs because of that. Because now we have a legal document that says if they do, we can basically go after them. Because they weren't doing it. It was terrible. You imagine your children's data was being plumbed. I mean, it was all through algorithms they were searching for so they could hit you with advertisements. It's like, hang on a second, these are children. So I didn't mind doing it for us. I can ignore those ads, but for children, I didn't want our children subject to that. So good news is Google has changed all that policy. They don't go after children in any way, so you can have them. You can use Google Docs and any of the Google apps. So now we use all that, but initially we didn't, and that's why we created our own cloud. So we had everything in our own cloud, and we did. Now we use a combination. So I wouldn't think that's worth your investment, because that's an expensive investment. It's about $500,000 to build that cloud up. So I'm sure you don't have that money to spare. Anyway, so what do we do on the? A teacher master. I told you about this Academy of Blended Learning. Let me tell you a little bit more about lessons learned from what we did. The first year we did, we converted 7 schools, and we went to the 100 teachers and said, we think we're moving over to a new system. You're all welcome to your job, but you have to go to Academy of Blended Learning during the summer to keep your job. 2 weeks of nonstop. So they all grumbled about it. They didn't like it. You can imagine. That's where we kind of went off the ceiling a little bit hard. I will say, 20%. So 20% resigned and retired, or some resigned. Most, and probably a lot of them probably should have retired earlier because they were tired. And so the idea of doing more work, they were tired and they loved their job, but they weren't going to learn some new skills. And that kind of tells you where they were at. They were tired, and that's the way students were feeling. The teacher was tired. They weren't bad teachers, don't get me wrong. But they weren't ready to take the step to this. And they self-selected. We never fired anybody. We did lose some good teachers, I would say, because they just didn't like the way it went down. They since reapplied to come back in, and we didn't take them. Because it was difficult. That we needed support. We needed support, and it was difficult. And when we didn't get the support, it was very rough. I mean, just to be honest, it's hard. But the teacher did it. The first year, we had 100 teachers, and the first week was optional. It was considered a boot camp, where it was remedial skills. If you were a teacher now, we're going to be expected to use these iPads. A lot of them back, 3 or 4 years ago, didn't have a lot of use of iPads back then, so it was probably relatively new for some of them. And so they had to learn new skills. To show you how well a job Santa Clara did, at the beginning of they had pre-screened everybody. So there were certain people who were required to come to the boot camp. I think it was 33 had to come to boot camp because their skills, self-declared skills, weren't up to par. Okay, so they needed to know how to turn on the iPad, turn off swipe. I mean, there's certain, basically, you think everyone would know, but they needed to get comfortable. And that's what the whole purpose of the boot camp was. To show you how good a job they did, by the time we got to, then it was an optional week. Remember, there's 100 teachers in the system. By the time we got to Friday afternoon, there was 87 teachers in the boot camp. By their own, they weren't getting paid. This was totally for free for them to do. If they wanted to do it, they didn't want to do it, they didn't have to. So when the next week, when everything started, there was excitement the next week. And then that 2 weeks went really, really well. And once people who submitted into it, they just thought, the one thing that came back, it was just too much, too fast. And so they couldn't absorb all that in 2 weeks. It was just, and so we continued on throughout the year. It was always 2 weeks plus once a week online, and then once a month gathering as a group after school for 2 to 3 hours on a Thursday. And that continued out through the year. We've since changed the system to a 2-year program. Instead of doing a 1-year program, they felt, quote unquote, they were drinking from a fire hydrant. It was just too much too fast. They weren't able to internalize and apply it to the classroom right away. So Santa Clara has designed the program heavy-ended on theory at the beginning so they could get to know what they meant to do, and then they go to application by application. So it's a much better program now, but that was the lessons learned. And then every teacher who is in the system has to be in the blended learning. If you have not got a certificate of blended learning, you cannot teach inside Drexel. In it, or have a certificate. We basically saying, show us, demonstrate that you can do this blended learning according to the rotational model, or go into the program and learn how to do it, because we can't afford to invest this much money into the system and not have those devices be used to what we're intended, or the programs we use. Does that make sense? That's kind of what it is. It sounds harsher than it actually was, but and then the principals self-elected to ask us to put this program, the leadership program, because they felt they needed the skills. So we worked with Santa Clara to build this program as well, and it was a great success. So what's the enrollment look like? The first year, we reversed the trend of losing 5% a year. That's what right across the diocese was. And then we stabilized the first year. And the second year, we're up 5%. This year, we haven't got the numbers completely in yet because there's all sorts of reasons why. But it's no less than 7% increase, more than likely about a 10% increase over year. So and it looks like we renovated some of these schools. So it looks like literally every week we got more students coming into school, even now, which is pretty radical considering the school year's already started. But that will stop pretty much in the next couple of weeks, because then we transfer over if there's really problems. and then we're kind of looking at the next year. So your typical onboarding is kindergarten, first grade. That's your, K, pre-K, K, and the next opportunity really is 5th grade. That's you're moving into 6th grade. That's your kind of 2 onboarding period. If you don't get them in 1st grade, they generally aren't going to switch over until they come to middle school. I mean, that's not a science. That's just kind of the data showing us that's roughly what people generally don't move their children unless they absolutely have to. Unless you give them a super incentive. That's one of the challenges we're up against. But there are approaches to changing that, and I'd be interested in hearing what you're doing here locally in the Hispanic in particular. But we made it more available. We've just recently I secured another $900,000 a year in financial aid for the system. Now we give those out in scholarships as need basis. You have to apply for the scholarship using what we've been using at the PSAS, but we'll be using another one next year. It's a standardized application process. You apply for the financial aid. Now, our tuition is expensive compared probably to here. I mean, my tuition at my elementary school, I'm a pastor of one of these schools, and our tuition is $8,900, elementary schools. The cheapest one of our schools is $6,600, and that's in the lowest the neighborhood. But we're giving them up to $5,000 of tuition assistance. So what they only need to do is really come up with $100 to $200 a month. And in one of the schools where the daughters support, sometimes they only come up with $100, $200 for the whole year. But we want to have them have some skin in the game, so some dollar amount. Most of the donors I'm getting money from scholarship really believe in helping kids get educated. And they want their parents to have some skin in that game. So even if they only pay $50 a month or $25 a month, they really don't care as long as they pay something, even if it's only $10 a month. And the donors I'm in contact with, just big hearts. They want this to happen. They also know the only way to advance the poor, economically disadvantaged, is through education. I mean, that is a fact, and we know that. And one of the facts we don't really talk about, in this country and around the world, English as your language is a language of prosperity. We've got to teach, they've got to learn English, and they've got to know it. All for dual immersion, whether it be Mandarin or Spanish and English, but English has to be completely taught. We can't get away from that. It is the economic driver of the world. If we do not teach them English, we are economically setting them up for a lifetime of poverty. And just be clear, that's the data from every business journal, every business thing will tell you that in the world. So, so look, we want to have the full seats. So why is this important? Like, it's hard to get this to parents, through to parents, that we've got to fill that seat up next to Johnny and Maria, because that empty seat is costing us money not having it full, and it is putting pressure on the system whether it will survive or not. The analogy I use in this is, and we had one of our parents at the school is very, very smart. She is from Argentina, and she gets a flight directly from San Francisco to Buenos Aires, and she just loves this flight. But over the last couple of, they noticed on the airline that when they got, like, she's got 5 children, so they got all the 5 children all spread. There's tons of seats, so they get on board, but they got tons of seats. And the airline the pilot got on and says, we really want to encourage you to encourage people to fly in our airline and to fly back, because otherwise, if you don't, we're going to have to shut down this route, and you're going to have another leg, go to another city and then go there, because they can't keep running. That's kind of the mindset we have. People love to have all the space, and you get more one-on-one with your teacher because it's only a ratio of 1 to 12. That's wonderful. But we can't afford 1 to 12. If you want 1 to 12, the cost of tuition is going to be $15,000. Are you willing to pay $15,000? No. Then bring your friends into school. I mean, you got to have the parents understand the economic. There's a law of economics here. You have to have a certain dollar amount to make the school. Talk about cost per student parity. You've got to make it work. You've got to bring a certain dollar amount per student. Now, you can bring that in through a scholarship by getting the wealthy people over here to help pay for people here, because you are Catholic and we've inspired you to give back what these people needed. So you're not going to give it to yourself, you're going to give it to these people. So you can do that, but you've got to arrange that, because these people don't have any access to these people. You've got access as church, because I know these people, I don't know you, and I know you need this education, and I know you want to give, you don't know it yet. But you're going to give it, and so that's what you do. You try to help them understand that. And that's doable, and that's what we're doing here. So where do we bring in the money? So far, it's 16 million. $7 million from his Sabrata family. It's one of our big donors in our valley. $5 million from Shea Family Homes. I'm not sure if you have a Shea Family Homes out here. They did a $2 million renovation of 3 of our schools, and they committed to do $3 to $5 more million of renovation for the next set of 3 schools we're bringing on board. $1 million from Hilton Foundation. Hilton believed so much in us that they wanted this to succeed. They gave us $1 million and said, go make it successful so we can replicate it across the country. And it was unbelievable. They've never given that to the Diocese of LA before. They've given it to the system, but never to education outside San Jose, outside LA. And then National Foundation, another one that wants to remain anonymous, is a big believer in Catholic education. Catholic cause gives another $500,000, and then about $3 million individuals, plus more money in that. Now, some of them directed it, some of them didn't direct it. Some went to scholarships, some went to technology, blended learning, some went to teacher development, and some were just, basically anywhere you wanted. So you decide. But a lot of them had a lot to say about the governance model. I mean, didn't necessarily direct it there, but Sim says, yeah, this makes more sense. Time to get rid of the priests out of the way. That's not a good thing to have our people say. That's an experience that they're having, that the priests are in the way. I don't know about you as a priest. I don't necessarily thought I was in the way, but that's how people were experiencing it, that we were causing the problem. I say, pastors, let's step out of the way and let's help solve this problem. Let's not get in the way. If they think we're in the way, how do you want me to help? You take over the governance. Let me help in every other way. We don't need to run the school. In fact, we're not trained to run the school. So we need to let this go, because it's a false sense of power that we might have, but it's also a false sense that somehow we're the problem. We're not the problem. Now, we may not be helping, so tell us how we can help. Tell me what you want me to do. You want me in the campus? You want me to visit the school? Sure. I put in the contract, the biggest pushback I had in the contract when we switched over from the governance of the parish to the Drexel, I had a one-line contract, one line in the contract the pastor had to sign, is that he was going to spend 2 hours on the campus a week. Well, you can't tell me I have to spend 2 hours on the bus. That's ridiculous. Every week? I said, 2 hours, that's all. Once a week, 2 hours. I have funerals, I have mass. I said, you can't spend 2 hours on the campus a week visiting the kids. I can't say, well, so we moved 3 of the pastors. They weren't willing to commit 2 hours to being on campus a week. We moved them. Absolutely in a nanosecond. That was a stroke of a pen of issue. So now everyone takes on at least 2 hours. I mean, 2 hours, that's not a lot of time. And correct me, that doesn't seem outrageous, does it? I mean, it's absurd that somebody thinks it's okay to object against it, I think. But anyway, they didn't say, so it was all right. Sorry, yeah, I just talked about it. I went ahead of myself. But the pastor is critical in success of sacraments, spiritual outreach, and spiritual formation. The pastor's skills is really, really important in helping the faculty be men and women of prayer. We're imparting our children's religious education to our parents, to these teachers. And they don't have the formal education of the religious nuns and priests yet, so we need to help them. That's where our time is well spent. Now look, I put on these desks, and I'm really biased on your tables, these prayer books. We give these out to every single one of my school. I'm looking to do this at every single one of the schools in our system. In fact, we're going to start doing that as of next month. We want the teachers to become men and women of prayer, first and foremost. So it's really important that we as pastors engage in them as men and women who seek to be men and women of prayer. I mean, respect that they're on a journey. They're not all in the same place. And we need to meet them on that journey as best we can. The nice thing about not being their supervisor anymore, you can be their spiritual director now, because you don't have any conflict of interest. Whereas before we couldn't do that. That's really hard to be as spiritual directors. Some of your supervising kind of considered not really a good thing. But like how powerful would it be if you were to take the 10 or or 20 teachers in your system, and you met with them once every 2 months as their spiritual director. That would be awesome. If you could build up a relationship that you'd be trusted so much that they would come and talk to you about their spiritual journey and deepen their relationship with Christ and how they serve Christ through their ministry as a teacher. Now that's time worth spending, not fighting over finances. I wish I could get out of all the finances myself. I mean, I did not go into this job to be doing what I'm doing today, which is all the finance and all this fundraising. I mean, I'm raising, $3 million a year myself. That's just $3 to $5 million a year every year. That is not what I signed up for. That is not what I want to do. I mean, I want to be the pastor. I mean, my first passion is my parish. It's the reason why I haven't given up my parish. I mean, we've opened up a homeless shelter at my parish. I mean, that's my passion. That's what I want to do. But this is where the church needs attention right now. So, because I think we can do this together. But I'd love if all our pastors, all our priests could be engaged on this spiritual enterprise. That's new evangelization. That's the re-evangelization of our teachers and through that to our students. Oh, you know what? I guess there's no power here. Huh? No, I don't think it's actually no power at all. There's got to be power there somewhere. Okay, just give it a second. I was a false sense of security. Having a power plug that I assumed would work. Story of my life. Every time I said this to somebody earlier, every time I've ever given a presentation of technology, always something goes wrong. It's like they do it intentionally. The angels, it's guardian angel today, isn't it? They should be protecting me. Where's Michael and Raphael and Gabriel? I tell you. Anyway, I'm almost done. So the last, any question? Let me, while the computer's backing up, is there any questions on that so far? Because I've just only got a handful of slides left.
You picked Apple. Can you tell us why you chose an Apple product?
Yeah, when we did this research 5 years ago, the other computer tablets, we decided we had done a laptop analysis back when I first started this. I'm ordained now 16 years. So we did it at my first school 15 years ago, and Apple were way ahead on the laptops. But then that gap narrowed because of price, and laptop to laptop. And then when we decided the laptops really weren't where the kids they really wanted to use iPads. It was going to be easier. The price point had to come down from the laptop. Laptops are too expensive for us to be able to do it where we want to. So we went the iPads, and the applications that were available on the iPad were just phenomenal. Now, since then, you got lots of other lots of other pads, different types of pads, but they're available. I'd have to go back and look at the analysis again. I'm not sure I'd say it's an automatic iPad today, because an awful lot of all those applications are available now on different types of Droid pad machines. So I think you'd have to make that decision for yourself. The reason we did it, because at the time, all the apps that we wanted to use were on the iPad, and the fun ones the kids wanted to use were on them. Now, I'm just not sure that's necessarily the case today. I will say the Google's Chromebooks. I'll tell you the main contributing reason was the maintenance. iPad and the Apple are just lower maintenance. It's just, I mean, I don't want to call down the hack devils of the world, but there's just less hacking on the Apple system and the Apple iPad. And there's just bazillions of hacking that goes on the PCs. And that was one of the main contributing reasons early on. The Chrome, it's improved a lot, but at the time we did ours, it was just a Google Doc machine. That's really all it was for us. And that could have served us, but we were using other things at the time. But I'd say I'm not sure I'd lock in and say it necessarily has to be an iPad today. I would lean towards it myself still, But I would do that research yourself. I think you have to do that research yourself, depending on what you're going to use application-wise today. Yeah.
The other thing that needs to be taken into consideration is bandwidth. The Chromebooks are only online. They're
Correct.
exclusive online, and so if you've got schools like we do in rural areas that don't have a huge pipe, it really impacts the use of the devices.
Correct. Did everyone hear that? So it's being offline, online. That's what I'm saying. You need to look at what you're using your computer for. When you're using Google and it's all its suite of products, you end up, if you're offline, you can't get anything. Whereas at least in the iPad, you can draw stuff onto the iPad and a lot of stuff is there. But that's not totally, sister, not completely true today. They've changed some of the stuff that you can get a lot of stuff mirrored on the local device now. So that's why I say I wouldn't be as confident to stand up here. I haven't done the latest research. Our research is 3 years old and we're just sticking with it just because we have no reason to change it. We have a lot of momentum. I don't want to add another wrinkle of change inside the system after people get used to it. I want to get to, I think the parent and community outreach is really, really important, but I think we do that very well as a community, as Catholic communities already. This is just building on what Catholic communities do well. But having the pastor play a role in that is just super, super critical. The pastor's role and the priest's role is still hugely important across in an effective way. They are huge enablers. And if they can be partners and forget about the governance of it, if they can be partners with us on this, we could turn this system around in a couple of years. Literally, I'm saying 7 years, we can have this thing turned back or back up those numbers, back up. We could gain 1 million students in 7 years, easily. I mean, the system numbers, I've modeled it out. I can reestablish the Diocese of San Jose in 7 years. I've modeled it out. It's a reasonable assumptions there. Now, outlandish assumptions, and I've proven them back, both modeling financial and enrollment numbers. They're real, they're there, it's possible. Now, we have to do certain things and we have to plan to execute. But let me show you some of the results. I have this on the tables in front of you, but I just think this is just huge numbers. Now, I want to tell you, this is only the last year. When we did this first, we changed from, somebody asked me what do we use? We use STAR. STAR testing, it's a Renaissance product, and it's fantastic. Night and day difference between what we were using in MAP. We were using MAP, measuring active progress, and they promised us that they would get it. They promised us. We just gave up waiting. That was the NWA. We just gave up waiting because we couldn't bore down into detail. I want to show you, and this is kind of exciting, but I know I'm going to run out of time, but I want to show you how we got there and why this is important. This is, if you did this 2 years earlier, where our initial data is, that will be, my guess, is be closer like the reading, 51%. But this is the data we had only on year one, which is really year 3 of our data. This is last year's data, right? And you'll see we moved up to 79%. That's not stunning, but 79% is huge. Now, I want to know what this means. This is we're 10% above the national average. National average is 50%, Tom. We're talking about how many of our students are above the national percent by 10 points. We're 79% of our students, and we've got economically disadvantaged schools. This program is working. Alex is a phenomenal program, and we used to use, we use now SDMAT, but we also used to use, I forgot the other one. Come to me in a second. But there's some really great products out there. You use whatever products you want. It's the discipline of the application. It's important. The model has the fidelity to data-driven decision-making. That's what makes the difference. It's not just it's not the program. It's about the teachers committing to helping the individual student grow. This is what we did. Now, you look at this number. 51% of our students were just above that. This isn't very good news. I mean, for us, we're asking our parents to spend $9,000 on average, $7,000 to get what just about the same what you get in the public school for reading. Wow, we can do way better than this. And so we showed we could. We pulled up the points, 8 points, and our data is at this one. We pulled it up another 5 points since then. Yeah.
Do you know where you were when you started this podcast?
See, unfortunately, I can't because they mixed the data. There are 2 different sets of data. And I used to try and go and extrapolate back, and I'm a statistician, so I can't. I violate my own principles when I do that. I'm just to say it's worse than this. That's all I can say, because I'd love to be able to give you a data. I could show you on some of the charts. If you look at the annual report we submitted, it's one of the old reports, you'll see the map data. And we definitely pulled up 20%, but I can't match them because they don't line up. I can't show you what 3 years worth of data was. All I'm showing you is 1 year's worth of data. And that's pretty impressive for 1 year. So our new results are coming out this week, and we are better than this. We are over 73% on school data. And here is a growth. That's just showing them as growth. Now, this is really important for educators, you know this, but pastors and other administrators. The growth is really what's really important here. Where are you taking the kids at, and where are you helping them grow? But why is STAR so good? I get excited about this because this is really where it is.
Before you go there, can I just ask you one quick question?
Yeah.
Why did you choose to report it plus 10%? Do you find that clouds people? So my worry would be that if I put the plus 10 there, that people would miss the point.
Well,
Like,
because in our area, just doing what the public schools is just not good enough. There's so much money going out in public education. You're just doing what everyone else is doing. They're going, why would I bother doing that? So we had to put, also the board, the donors were killing me. You can't have a goal, the donors, you can't have a goal to do as good as they are. That's not a goal.
right, I agree.
So you see, your goal is 10% higher, and tell me what it doesn't make a difference what it is. If you're if you're only 10% to do it, when you grow that. So the idea is you go and you publish that. My school inside this data is 15. So it's site specific. The whole system is 10, but some schools, our school for math next year is 20% higher, and we're meeting it. We're at 27% higher. We're at 70, and our school is at 70, 83% is our new data next week. 83% of our students are meeting the goal by 20%. That's not proof that this blended learning is working, guys. I don't know how else to prove it to you. I mean, I love when my bishop says, well, the pastors say that, you know, that their school's doing great. And I said, yeah, show me the data. They said, well, they say the principal says they're doing a great job. Yeah, and you know what the principal says? The pastor's saying they're doing a great job. They compliment each other. They're just self-congratulating each other. I said, they got no data. We now have the data because we forced the entire system, all the schools, to use STAR data. Now we're showing it to them. I'm not going to show it to you because it's not fair. We promised them we'll give them 1 year. We'll show it to the world after 1 year. They've got their lesson now. They now know how bad they are. And believe me, they're 10 plus points below us. And we're the poorer section of schools, except for my school. My school's advanced. So let me look at this. I know you can't see all this. This is the part that's really exciting. So as a start, if only change this light. Okay, so if you look at this, so here's what is your proficiency rate, right? And here's the growth level, right? So here's our 7 schools. These are bubble charts representing our 7 schools, right? So what we can do inside our system, our report says, I can look at this and I can click into one of those, right? Those are our school. And so here's what happens. What do the quadrants mean? So this quadrant means that the child is low performing and low growth. This means that they're the higher performing, low growth. This means they're higher growth but lower achievement, and here they're both high growth and higher achievement. So this is the proficiency, this is growth. So if a child is, let me give you an example. We borrow down into that. Now you get the 7 schools, right? Now if you borrow down, you get a scattergram of where the students are, right? Now if you go to a teacher and say, that teacher, now if I hover over that live in the system, I'll get the name of the teacher, or name of the student. I'll get the name of the teacher if it's a school. But if I go down to, if I'm a teacher, I hover over that, and I should know who that blue bubble is. If I don't know who that blue bubble is before I click on it, I'm not doing my job as a teacher. You should know right away who is is a low achiever and a low growth. Right? So what is a low growth? Man, you're educators, you know this better. But this is awesome to have this data that you can go and you know what you can do with these. So if it's like obviously we want everyone who's high growth and high. Look at where we have some of our students. They're off the scale for growth. They're off the scale on proficiency level. I mean, we are enabling students to do what I don't think you could ever have done without the computer. You're enabling them to run off the chart because they're not being hand managed, because they're being self-directed. They themselves are doing this. The teacher's playing a role. Now, what the teacher needs to do is look at these bubbles and say, why? For example, are this student and this student so low on the achievement level? But you might say, okay, they got to struggle with this part of the program or this part. But this one here is curious because this is low growth, right? This is low growth and low achievement. So they're not growing. They may be low achievement. They should be growing, right? They should be moving along the curve. Why? Now you can go to the parent and say, like, okay, so now listen, look, little Brandon's not doing well. We know that. You know that. But why? He's not even, so we can start to going into, you can have a real directed conversation with a parent about why is Johnny not trying? Is something going on at home? Most often when there's somebody in this curve here, little Brendan's parents are getting divorced. And little Brendan's not doing very hard, not trying very hard. The teacher already knows that. But now she's got data. And she can go to the parents and say, look, I know you guys have got problems, but it's affecting your child. Look, well, I tell you, that's sobering news to a parent. When they know that their relationship is affecting their child and they see it in black and white, it's a whole lot different than you saying to them as a parent, well, I think your child's having a hard time in school because of your divorce. You better get yourself a new head. They're going to take it off. But when you show them the data, well, why do you think little Brenda's acting like that? They'll look at each other and they'll start owning the problem. You start to make parents partners again. That's the challenge that we have. Anyway, I'm going to close with this. I know, and then take questions. I think I have to press this. There's a little video we did for our school systems talking about our next year's growth.
St. Catherine Drexel is one of our amazing American saints, and she was really committed to making sure that Catholic education was accessible for all. When the St. Catherine Drexel initiative was formed, it was this intentional outward effort to adopt the charism and the namesake of St. Catherine. The 4 pillars of promise are the core principles that make up the foundation of the Drexel school system. So when we talk about those 4 pillars, we're talking about the commitment of the Drexel system to ensure that Catholic education is not only authentic and robust in terms of its Catholicity, but also that we're committed to making sure that a Catholic education is accessible for all students, that achievement is at the forefront of all that we do so that we have good people and also great scholars, and then that we're committed to accountability, ensuring that our Catholic schools have governance that makes sense, and we're ensuring that everyone who's a part of our system fulfills the mission of our schools.
In the Drexel system, achievement plays a critical role in the development of our students. In every classroom, you're going to have different students with different abilities, but each child can achieve greatness in the Drexel system, giving all the opportunities and resources that we provided them, along with a 21st century education and instruction to go along with it.
Our teachers will plan out stations, and they'll group their students based on abilities so that each station targets a student's particular needs. One station, they could be using adaptive software, which would be something that would have them practicing a skill that they're struggling. Another station, they'll be in a small group setting with a teacher that actually has them working on gaps that they're missing or they're lacking in their learning. And a final station actually has them either working on classwork or a project where they're applying their learning in a way that's deeper and more meaningful.
I think it's important to the Drexel schools to make Catholic education accessible to all, because that is our mission and our vision. With the Drexel Scholarship, we're now able to offer more to the families that currently can't afford it.
Students have access to Wi-Fi, to technology, to iPads, especially for Eastside San Jose. There are a lot of families who don't have access to that, and coming to Most Holy Trinity provides them an opportunity to use those resources and to have the expertise of our teachers to help them in their education, help them develop socially, emotionally, and academically.
I think the role of the Drexel school system is quite different in terms of governance having the educational system being run by educators and having the pastor oversee the spiritual role of the school lends itself to where our strengths lie. This way, the pastor and the principal can work together to make the whole school community stronger, so sort of partners in this same entity moving the schools forward. Authenticity is the fourth and final pillar of the Drexel school system, where our faith is at the center of everything that we do. So when we talk about that pillar of authenticity, we're talking about the commitment in each of our schools in the Drexel system to engage our students in conversation about their faith, how their faith informs their decision-making, but also what that responsibility is in terms of social justice to our greater community.
Being a part of the Drexel Initiative is such a vital part of St. Patrick's School. We really try to embody St. Catherine Drexel and what she wanted to accomplish and carry out her mission. So we do quite a few service projects throughout the year. It just brought this wonderful light to all of the kids when they realized that God was within them when they were serving others in the community, but God was also in those who we serve.
So that's also available on the website. But so where are we at today? And then I'll open ourselves to the last slide. So right now we're in application process for bringing in 3 to 5 more schools. So we currently have 6 schools that are interested in it right now. But principal and staff to petition. When we did it first, we kind of we took 5 schools and we told them that had to come in because they were already in the red. They were looked like they were going to go bankrupt. They're going to lose. And we're not going to do that again. We paid for everything. We're not going to do that again. Now they have to put up 10% of everything we give them. We're going to give them $1 million of investment in their site. But they have to put up 10% of that. Now, if they can't put it up, we want to plan to see how they're going to help pay it back some way. We want them to have some skin in the game. You just can't have it all for free. Drexel school system then will review the application. We have a plan to engage the faculty, engage the community, and then we approval. Then they move into year 0, which is what we're in. That will be called. They get $1 million of site improvement during that summer between now and the beginning of school next year. We did help train, beginning of the training of teachers, beginning of the principal training, and then of course staff operation training as well. And then year 1 is when you launch the students and the parent in the factory. So you're like we're in year 0 right now, and year 1 is the students get to engage in. So that's kind of where we're at. But the lady you saw in that program is Tara Rowley. She is the superintendent of Drexel Schools, assistant superintendent. Much the way Donna is the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and oversees their schools. The same Dara. She could easily have given this presentation as I do, but she's busy running the system. So, so questions. We'd like to take questions all the way to the back.
And because of all this, how much is your enrollment?
How much is my enrollment in? I'm heavily involved. How would you like to quantify it in hours? I work an 80-hour week.
I thought about numbers of students.
And year enrollment.
Oh, year-end enrollment. Oh. Okay, so we saw the increase in enrollment this year of about last year over to the end of, so about 8%, and this year we're tracking like another 8 to 10%, 7 to 8%. This coming year we're going to have a big pop because the numbers are going to get published. We haven't published numbers. We promised the parish schools that we wouldn't publish numbers to protect them, because that's the problem. You're not trying to shut other Catholic schools. So, but we've got to go public because we're at a tipping point. Once we get these next schools in, these next 3 to 5 schools in, then we'll be at a tipping point where we take in, the next year we'll take in 10 more. That's our plan, is to take 7. We'll hire a whole duplicate staff and repeat the whole thing the next level. So, yeah, the numbers haven't been stunning increase. I thought we could get a 20% pop. You know, people are, it's a lot of money. You have to put in that money, and it's hard to put part, you know, Silicon Valley is very expensive to live in. So what we have to do, we've only just after getting this next to 900,000 in financial aid, that's going to be a game changer, because now we can release that money to people who want to come in, and that's going to be a game changer. So I think we're going to find that next year we're going to have a huge pop in at attendance for next year. I think that's going to be really precipitous for next year. Yes, Donna.
In a comparison to consortium schools, since 2012, we're at 23%.
Sorry, what was that? Can you say it a little?
Since 2012, since the inception of consortium schools, we're at 23%.
Annual or 20%, 23% over the 3. Okay. Yeah, so I would say that we reversed the trend. So to give you the thing, we reversed the trend of 5% loss. And we're 10 and 10. So we're probably not quite 23%. We're probably around 20% increase over the beginning to the now. What? Yeah. So I will say we just announced the figures for this year, just to K through 8 grade. We had the meeting with our teachers and principals last year, our principals last week. And the system is down 280 students. Drexel was up 130 students. So the school system is really down 370, nearly 400. And we hide it, make it look good because where we increased, they decreased. So, we gave that news to them. So there's a little bit of urgency now. Yeah.
How much of your increase is coming from their decrease?
Very little. It's interesting. That's good. That's a great question. We don't see a lot of transfers. It's interesting. We have a lot of movement in our diocese. Our biggest challenge is people get moved out of our diocese. A lot of people just move out. So you got to look for new people to come in, whether they're coming in from out of town or we've got a very mobile society. Even in the poorest part of town, they move because their house prices are outrageous. Like, you can't get a house in San Jose for under $1 million. I mean, it's just, even though, it's hard. So we do have, I haven't analyzed, so I don't know exactly, to be honest with you. I'd have to, we do track it, so it's a great question. I'll take that back. Somebody had a question, Michael? Yes.
When you say cutting edge blended learning, you kind of outline what that looks like. Traditionally, I think of that as a learning management system online. But is that some sort of learning management system and iPad one-to-one?
So what was the first, you were asking about blended learning?
Yeah, what?
So blended learning is the methodology. So I would say the student information system has nothing to do with blended learning. That's a management system. So we use PowerSchool, nothing to do with blended learning. You could use that in any school. The use of the iPads is just a tool in the process. The methodology you're using is our particular version of blended learning is called station rotation model, right? That's the blended learning. What you're doing is you're blending. You go back to that slide. You're blending the online with brick and mortar. You're blending the teacher directed and the student directed. So you're blending these two realities all the way. But the bottom key is so that it's driven by the data that the student performs according to where he or she needs to go. Okay, so that's the definition. Michael Horn, that definition is like Michael Horn and Brian Greenberg. They're with the Institute for Blended Learning. I think it's called Institute for Blended Learning. Yeah.
Do you use a learning management system in addition to PowerSchool?
Yeah. We have Canvas. That's the Sanitara standardized. We didn't. That's Sanitara. We didn't. That's what they standardized on. We didn't. So that's why I'm sure. You use Canvas? Yeah. Canvas is pretty standard. Pretty much around the universities as far as I'm aware. It's less expensive than some of the other ones. Blackboard, the other ones are really expensive. Not much. Canvas is making a lot of inroads, especially at elementary school and high schools. Any other questions? Yes.
What was your startup cost like for when you engaged in the school and you're putting in the technology, you're putting in the wireless transformation?
So we have a whole matrix out. She asked the question, how much was our startup cost per site, right? So we our modeling is based upon a base year about between it's 150 to 300,000 depending on the site. Startup costs, hardware network costs. It's not going. You're not going to get anything less than $150,000 out of a site. Most costs, the average is 250, right? That's what. So we have budgeted 220. I think is what the actual average over all the ones we've done. We now, because of the Shea grant, we're giving us another 750 upgrades to painting, building, lights, all that sort, because all the buildings are old. So that's there. It's $5,000 per teacher for the Blended Learning Academy. That's the cost. That's what we pay for that. We will pay the first year of the iPads. The iPads is a 3-year contract. So we will pay the first year. The organization, the school needs to pay the next 2 years. So we give them 1 year startup fee. So the benefit to the school is about, and then what's the cost? We help, we oversee the control area of the finance, but we don't do it all. So we do help with that, but that's kind of a push. We lose and gain. So the benefit we've figured out is that right now, new schools coming in will get about $1.3 million investment to join the system, and with no need to pay back.
And then what is the sustainability goal? Like, so, you know, you're putting that 1.3 million in, the expectation of the school is the school then sustaining the rest of that for the continuum?
So
where does the donor fall in?
So it's great. What's the sustainability? So it's a 5-year full ramp of sustainability. So from year 0 being year one, really. So there's 4 years after the first year we pay for stuff. We have them on a 3-year trajectory to get to sustainability, right? So sustainability of cost. Like, so they've got to bring in more students. I mean, that's got to be a high priority. We'll give them scholarships, but they're always going to need scholarships. So we will continue to develop scholarships. Our end goal will be have about $5 million of scholarship a year. So one of the donors has promised to give me, if I meet all the metrics, will give me a $25 million donation for scholarships at the end in his legacy, if I meet all the metrics. So that will produce $1 million of interest a year, which will be given out of scholarships. So, and we need to match that times 2. So we need to have another, you have to have $5 million of ready available influx of cash to make it up. Now that's our system. You'd have to model it based upon your system. Your costs aren't as high. Our costs are way higher. But you probably don't, you might not have access to the wealth that we have, but you've got wealthy donors. Every Catholics are successful. Thank goodness they're very successful in the business world. So we want to tap them and enable them. Yes. No, sorry, the person behind you.
I'd like to ask a question about the teachers.
Yes.
From what you mentioned about Drexel schools, a lot of the strategy comes from governance and professional development. I think you mentioned comes from Santa Clara. Over the span of time, have your faculty insights to inform blended learning going forward?
Yeah, it's a dialogue. So one of the really geniuses behind this system is that the teachers collaborate at teacher grade levels. So all the 5th grade get together, all the 6th grade get together every single month. So now the reason why the other teachers are wanting to be part of the Drexel system is because they don't have access to that. So at first that was hard because teachers generally don't do that. Well, what do you want to share? Well, I know my stuff. I do my stuff. You do your stuff. When they started to find best practices and they started to find, oh, you do it that way? Oh, that's kind of cool. Can you show me that? So they start to really get best practice. They advance really fast. And Santa Clara picked up on that very early and started to accelerate that and fed that. So now that they're led by the teacher, not by a facilitator. One teacher off the pod gets to lead it on a month-by-month basis at a different school. So they really, that's where Santa Clara has added some value to that. And the teachers are, that's our biggest success, is the collaborative environment of the teachers to teachers. Especially some of these more unique subjects, science, some of those areas, it's really hard to accelerate some of that stuff. But when you can get 6 science teachers together or 7 science teachers together, wow, you can start to really get back to practice. Well, no, don't use that printer. This is the printer we got. The inkjet is cheaper. You can do this, and if you do this, wow, you just start to accelerate best practices. So that's been a critical component of it. Yeah.
So you mentioned the station rotation model. It has the online component. You guys try to pick programs for that are system-wide? Like
yes, it's system-wide design. Okay. So you asked the question is, when we do the online component, are those decisions made for those programs system-wide decisions or local parish or school decisions? They're system decisions, but informed by the teachers. Teachers have the input back in to that. So we have changed those twice in the last 4 years based upon student-teacher feedback. So we went, for example, we had Alex, before we had Alex, I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of the different programs. Alex is a math program that used from 4th to 5th grade, actually at 3rd grade now, all the way to high school. Phenomenal program, not terribly exciting to use the kid. It's not like terribly super interactive. ST Math has got the little penguin, I think it's still the penguin. Isn't that the penguin? Isn't that ST Math? Anyway, it has a more character, it's younger. So they select that for younger grades. We selected ST Math, Alex for the upper grades. The first program we used ST, and it was a different one. I forgot what the name was now. I deliberately blocked it out because it was a nightmare. we changed that rapidly because that did not meet our needs. It did not use the station rotation model well. It did not. So you have to know what, if you're going to do the station rotation model, certain products work for that. We use Dreambox, and the parents, the teachers liked it, and we actually might switch in and out of that. We don't know. We're going to let the teachers decide that. So it's a teacher informed decision by the system, if that makes sense. We're also doing the same thing with curriculum. All paper curriculums are standardized too. So we went to, the math program, I forgot now, I should know it. I forgot what the name of it, but we standardized in all math books, textbooks right across the system as well, and we forced that down, which has been a help, big time. All the schools, I don't know how your schools do it, but every school can make its own. It's got a choice of what curriculum. It has to use curriculum, but it could use which books it wants. They're all the same. We standardize in that. It makes it much easier for us. Yeah.
Do they take the iPads home, and is there a requirement to have online access at home?
Great question about online access at home. So the 6th grade and above take them home. 5th grade is a transition year. They teach them how to take care of them and take them home, practice with an empty one, take it home, because it's, those are breakable devices. And then what we do is we survey them. If they do not have access, we find an access to local, we help them find local access. In our area, we're pretty much covered. It's kind of hard not to be access available in Silicon Valley. You go down to the local library, you don't even need to go in, you can be outside and get it. So if they don't have access, then we have them come in early or stay late in the campus so they can have access, so they can do their homework, if it's online homework. So we are sensitive, very sensitive to surveying that and taking that. But sometimes they do need access. And if they do need access, then the teacher needs to know that so they can't assign homework that they can't do, right? That's sort of obvious. In Silicon Valley, one of our schools is 95% of our students are on lunch program. That shows you how poor they are, right? That's and 80% have access to computers at home. Just shows you. They've got a lunch program, but somehow they got access. Most of them are getting Comcast. They can't do it without television, and they get bundled, so they get Wi-Fi with the television. I mean, that's just the way it is. I'm not making judgments, so it's just the way it is. That's why I think we've got to find a way to break into it. Because if they're willing to spend, $200 on cable TV, will they spend $100 on their students' education and spend only $100 on the television? We've got to help them break this curve, because that's where we got to get true to them. That's the door by door, parish by parish sales job. We're just not good at selling our good works. It's just against ourselves. Yes, I think it's the last question, is it? Yeah.
I might have missed this, but when was the very first year from where we are today with Drexel? When was the very first year that you started?
2013. Yeah. So we're going into year 4. This is our year 4. 3 years into it. First year was, I will be honest with you, it was painful. We made, and TV's still on, I can't say everything. You can edit this out, can't you?
If you tell me, I will.
Yeah, I need to say that. So we made some pretty significant hiring mistakes. And we didn't, that was our biggest thing. So I will say that the major success is the partnership between me as Vicar General, the Bishop's spokesperson, and the vicar, the superintendent, and the CFO. That trifecta is incredibly important. You have that trifecta, that's a pretty hard nut to crack. You've got that, then the hiring position underneath that, you got to make sure you got the right person. And sometimes, I was saying this earlier to somebody, because you can't, it's oftentimes different. It's the attitude, right? You can't hire an attitude. What's your attitude about work? It's very hard to hire to. You only get attitude when you're into it. How much they love the kids, how much they love. So we're now hiring much more. I have a pretty tough battery of tests I put every new principal through. But then the bottom line, I'm going for gut. And I rely on that, and the superintendent does well. In the end, I got to believe that you're a person who really wants to do this. Because you're going to take a lot of flack to do this. And you got to have stamina, and you got to have passion, and you got to have a willingness. You got to have a passion for the Lord. Because if we're doing all this just to advance people economically, that's not the reason I'd be doing it. You got to do this because we love the Lord, and we believe this is how our children, the whole child, will get educated. And then when you develop this whole child in this way and you meet them where they're at, man, I tell you, it's just seems magic to see these kids come. I mean, I love celebrating Mass with them. You know, they come up with these little angels. I remember when they were this high, never this tall, and it's awesome to see. If you can have that in a leader, everything else lines up eventually, you know? So that'd be my sense. Thank you very much. I'll be here for the rest of the afternoon.
Just make two really big announcements.